Chapter 101. We are from Terra. What are you going to do? The lieutenant gasped, struggling to stand. His voice was raw. We will never surrender. You don't get a choice, replied Nightwatch, and with a hard kick sent the armored officer sprawling. He loomed over the lieutenant. I can drag you, or you can walk up there with some dignity. He held out his hand, the offer plain. I'll walk myself. The lieutenant swatted the hand away and forced himself up, panting and furious. Take them, he snapped. Nightwatch shepherded the captured Space Marines down the corridor and into the elevator that led up to the bridge. When the doors opened, a towering machine dominated the chamber, a colossal robot standing sentinel over the ship. They stripped the lieutenant of his helmet. Underneath was a weathered, hard-jawed man whose contempt flared at the sight of the machine. Abominable intelligence, he spat, the insult sharp and bitter. He spat on the deck as well. The robot paid him no mind. Its optical sensors swept the floor, blue scanning light washing over the droplet and the man's face, cataloging what he had said and what he had left unsaid. Saliva contains a corrosive liquid. How interesting, Turing said, his electronic voice bright with curiosity. His left hand flared, a jet of fire vaporizing the spit before it could do any damage. Abominable intelligence. What do you want? The speaker spat back. The lieutenant swept his eyes across the bridge. There were hardly any crew aboard. The gunfire beyond the viewport had stopped, and yet their battleship still floated. Did you hear that? He just called you abominable intelligence. Harlan stepped out from behind Turing, grinning as he goaded the armored figure. So what? Turing shrugged in a strangely human way and spread his hands. He hates me. I hate him just as much. The Iron Man studied the man before him, countless crude modifications, organs warped and rebuilt. A messy, modified human, he said coldly. The lieutenant opened his mouth to answer, to spit a curse at the Iron Man's betrayal, and to proclaim himself a warrior of the Emperor. Instead, his gaze snagged on the scar-faced man in white power armor. On the shoulder pad was a familiar red rune, one of Terra's most notorious marks, the emblem of the 21st Legion. A strange rune had been inscribed into the gene seed of those warriors, a symbol no one really understood. The Emperor himself had been the first to interpret it and had christened the 21st Legion the Destroyer Warriors. They were unlike the other legions, astonishingly powerful, almost as if they were another species entirely. He knew that rune intimately. In the cold clarity of his enhanced mind, he understood at once what it meant. It was almost certainly the mark of a Primarch, one of the Emperor's lost sons. The lieutenant's thoughts snapped to life. He pictured the honor he could claim. So far, the Imperium had recovered only one Primarch, Horus Lupercal, gene father of the 16th Legion, who had been found on the gang world of Chthonia and brought to the Emperor's side by the Adeptus Mechanicus. Horus's discovery had intensified the Great Crusade, but no other Primarchs had been found. Now, standing before him was the first real clue to another. Excitement flooded the lieutenant's chest. The possibility of recovering a Primarch and the glory that would follow was suddenly within sight. Harlan did not believe in coincidence. Across tens of thousands of light-years of Starsea, identical marks did not simply repeat themselves. If this sigil matched one he knew, then there was only one explanation: a Primarch. The prisoner opposite him had worn a faint, almost insolent smile ever since the first glance. Harlan felt that smugness keenly. He tilted his head and looked down at the mark burning on his own shoulder. His expression tightened. "You know this mark?" he asked, voice low. Harlan had always been especially sensitive about anything connected to Doom. The light in the prisoner's eyes seemed genuine. The man coughed once, cleared his throat to steady his voice, and met Harlan's gaze. "We are from Terra," he said deliberately. "We are the Emperor's warriors." As for that mark, he let the sentence hang, scanning the room as if measuring how much could be risked. "I must meet its owner before I can speak of it." The lieutenant thought that answer safest. The existence of the mark already tied the white-armored man to the Primarchs in some way, but what that connection meant remained unclear. Better to keep the prisoner waiting until they could confront the Primarch and learn the truth. "Terra?" Harlan frowned, staring at the two newcomers. Ever since Doom had been crowned, the navigators had warned that Terra might rise again. Their arrival had been expected, but not this soon. He hadn't imagined Terra could extend its reach to the northern galaxy in only 30 years. The bridge crew, the Night Watch, straightened when they heard the name. Turing, the Iron Man, reached up and tapped his metal skull and said bluntly, "The Emperor? Sounds like a dictator." "Shut up, you clever machine," the lieutenant snapped. Then, as if noticing something, a crest or insignia, his voice smoothed into a strained respect, though the anger still burned through it. "Your soulless mouth has no right to speak of him that way." Turing's electronic eye swiveled to the indignant modified human and then began to chant in an annoyingly cheerful tone. "The Emperor! The Emperor! The Emperor! The Emperor! The Emperor! You!" The lieutenant's face flushed purple. He was breathing hard. If it weren't for protocol and his own self-control, he'd have been on the Iron Man in an instant. "Enough!" Harlan barked, cutting off the posturing. He stepped forward and demanded, "What is your purpose here?" The lieutenant lowered his head but did not flinch. He had known, as soon as the wreckage had fallen from the warp, that his ship had been cast here by a storm and nothing else. Yet a new purpose had formed in him, to welcome back a Primarch. He held himself steady, eyes hard. Harlan sneered, pressing the advantage. "Do you think we won't make you talk if you refuse?" The lieutenant straightened, chest out. "We do not fear Terra." Harlan's lip curled. "You can try." Unfazed, the lieutenant met Harlan's threat head-on. "I will say nothing until I meet the owner of the mark." He swept his gaze across the men standing behind him, and his voice swelled with pride. "As for them, they are fearless, like me. The Emperor's warriors do not fear death. We are born to die for him." The Space Marines behind him answered in solemn, unified tones. For them, death was not an end, but the only way to serve the Emperor. Harlan snorted, half amused, half impressed by the raw conviction in front of him. "Spirited lot," he said, then asked, "What is your name?" "Lieutenant Geryon, of the Imperium of Man's 5th Legion," came the reply. Harlan nodded once, understanding at last where the men had come from. The name Imperium of Man had a righteous ring to it. Nothing about it suggested a threat to doom. Still, Harlan was cautious. "Lock them in the cell and prepare to jump back to Nur," he ordered. He was curious about Doom's origins and whether there was any connection to the Imperium. He turned to the Iron Man at his side. "Brother Turing," he said, voice low and steady, "hail the other fleets. Tell them to rendezvous and seal this ship. Make sure no one gets off or slips away." As Doom's guardian, Harlan thought ahead. If anyone tried to act after meeting Doom, he would make sure they could not. Within minutes, a battleship dropped into formation. After a brief debrief and issuing a few more orders, Harlan set course for Nur. While the escorts fell into their positions, one of the imprisoned Space Marines leaned against the cold wall and couldn't keep his voice down. Quiet and wary, he asked Brother Geryon the question that had been gnawing at them all. They had seen the mark on the white-armored warrior's chest, the sigil of the 21st Legion. With a Space Marine's eyesight and memory, there was no mistaking it. "Brother, what are you talking about?" They'd been born in the void and had never seen the mark of the destroyer warrior, so the Legion brothers around him were naturally curious and fired questions at Geryon. He hesitated, aware they were under constant watch. Then, his power armor cold and useless at his feet, he hauled himself over and closed the gap to the nearest brother. He pressed his palm into the man's and traced a single word, Primarch. The battle brother trembled, gave a single, stunned nod, and collapsed into a crouch in the corner of the cell. When they'd first been captured, the Space Marines had been planning an escape to send word back to the Imperium and give the Council of War time to prepare. Now, even if the white-armored captors wanted them gone, the brothers would cling shamelessly to this moment. Around the cell, a single thought spread like wildfire. Holy crap, Primarch. Chapter 102, Target Terra. Depart. Thanks for the tips and donations. Deep bows. On the newer ring, Doom sat in his palace, poring over matters that required his judgment. Conquering the Nor worlds had never been easy. Over 30 years he had met one challenge after another, but he had found ruling them even harder. Reconstruction and governance. Restoring the Nor to their former glory and pushing farther into deep space demanded a different skill set than warfare. The people of the Nor worlds placed enormous expectations on their homeland and unwavering faith in their ruler. During Doom's 3 decades of rule, the Nor gradually yielded, and civilization began to flourish again. The population control laws that had been imposed during the worst of the resource crises were repealed, and the Nor population surged. Genetic decline, however, proved a far more stubborn problem. The Golden Men's genetic decay was severe. Even Musala and his Stone Men team were at a loss. In the end, it was Doom who tracked down the Lifeforger Primal and secured from it a genetic formula. When that formula was combined with the Stone Men's technology, it finally stabilized the failing genes. With the internal crises addressed and the Nor worlds on the mend, Doom now set his sights outward once more. Among the Nor worlds, vast amounts of lost technology were recovered and many STC templates were reactivated. Though civilization had regressed in some respects, the peoples of the Nor worlds enjoyed a relatively prosperous existence. Intelligent machines ensured there was enough food and clothing, and education was widely available. Still, Doom maintained strict ideological oversight to prevent another chaos incursion. The Night Watch Academy relocated to the newer ring and swelled to hundreds of times its former size, opening its halls to students from other worlds. Because fighters from those worlds often had shorter lifespans and less durable bodies than the Night Watch, Doom devised specialized training regimens for them. These mortal warriors would serve as an auxiliary army to support Night Watch operations in large campaigns. To ensure smooth cooperation, Doom wrote the Code of War, a manual designed to promote shared doctrine and mutual learning between the Night Watch and the auxiliary forces. Meanwhile, Sophia and the Stone Men brought several Forge worlds back online, continuously producing warships in the void. Doom also awakened a portion of the Iron Men and granted them the freedom to choose their own paths. Those who still wanted to fight for Nur were assigned to the fleet, filling roles as mobilizers or strategists. Those who refused could settle on the Nor worlds and live a slow, pastoral life. Doom granted them citizenship there, not servitude but a settled status, although their freedom came with a single, ironclad condition: no Iron Man could ever betray Nur. Each had to swear an oath to Doom. When the decree was announced, the Iron Men swore that oath en masse. Even some who had planned to retire to quiet farms chose instead to return to military service. Many volunteered to take up arms and defend Nur once more. After 30 years of conquest and administration, the Nor worlds were finally beginning to reveal their military potential. Their greatest weakness, however, was manpower. The Forge worlds had turned out vast stores of weapons, and whole war fleets sat sealed in the void, unusable for lack of crews. Sophia once proposed using forbidden technologies, artificial wombs and similar measures to accelerate population growth and quickly supply the workforce and crews the Empire needed. After lengthy debate and a series of experiments, Doom rejected the idea. Doom understood, with the kind of conviction that left no room for doubt, that Nur's true enemy was chaos, the malignant force of the warp. He had long suspected that those grown in artificial wombs lacked something vital in their souls, and were therefore unusually vulnerable to chaos's corruptions. Everything Doom did was in urgent preparation for chaos's inevitable return. In his plans for the future, he would forge the Nor worlds into an iron bulwark, tempering their will until it became a keen, unyielding blade. "My lord, Harlan has returned." Sophia's projection materialized beside the desk, slightly enlarged. At her normal scale, she wouldn't have been able to reach the desktop. Doom did not look up. He kept signing decrees with the quill between his fingers. "Has the Resistance Alliance been completely eliminated?" he asked without pausing. "No." Sophia answered plainly and summoned the battle report. According to Turing's log, they had an accident during the pursuit and one ship got away. "Have other ships been sent after it?" Doom asked. "Yes, my lord. Other warships picked up the chase." Doom set the quill down and finally met Sophia's gaze. "What sort of accident?" he asked. He had every confidence in Harlan's capabilities. Ordinary mishaps would not easily stop him. "They're docking their ships. They'll be here soon." Doom gave a slight nod and hurried to finish the last of the paperwork. He sighed inwardly. Anything was preferable to this bureaucratic grind. He'd rather be on the front lines fighting. If not for Sophia keeping the files in order, The papers on his desk would have grown into an impossible pile. When he finally pushed back from the desk, a commotion rose outside the throne hall. The clank of armor echoed through the corridors, mixed with other, unfamiliar metallic sounds. Following regulations, Harlan fitted restraints on Geryon and the others to make sure they couldn't launch a sudden attack. He found the precaution almost pointless. Those newcomers were no match for Doom, but he did it anyway. Geryon and his men looked around like country bumpkins, suddenly dropped into a palace. The city's prosperity and cultured atmosphere put even the throne world to shame. When they stepped into the throne hall, a giant sat on the throne. At a single glance, the space marine among them knew what he was seeing. Only a Primarch could possess such massive, majestic stature. The space marine squared his shoulders, tamped down his excitement, and stepped forward to fall in behind the Night Watch. Harlan couldn't help noticing the sudden change in their bearing. They looked like soldiers on parade, every movement precise and disciplined. Doom, too, registered it. The men Harlan had brought back treated him with an astonishment that looked almost like worship. Before Harlan could tell them to kneel, they were already on one knee, their voices loud and formal. "Great Primarch, son of the Emperor, the 5th Legion offers its highest reverence to you." Harlan stared from Doom to the kneeling captives, trying to make sense of the scene. What is a Primarch? The son of the Emperor? A Space Marine? The 5th Legion? Doom watched the kneeling Space Marine with a cool, assessing gaze. Their reverence did not seem staged. It was plainly sincere. Rise. The word was calm, but it carried an authority that brooked no argument. Geryon and the others obeyed at once, coming to their feet and standing ramrod straight, submitting themselves to the scrutiny of a Primarch. Perhaps it was a primal genetic deference, but even a casual glance from the Primarch made the battle-hardened Space Marine break out in a cold sweat. In that moment they understood. The figure before them was godlike. Horus himself did not compare. "Tell me what you know," the Primarch said. His calm voice carried an irresistible authority. The Marine who feared no death felt his knees tremble. Where he had been defiant with Harlan, Geryon now, along with his brothers, dropped to one knee. "I will tell you everything I know." Geryon told Doom everything. He spoke of the Emperor's rise on Terra, of the Astronomicon that lights the galaxy, and of the great crusade to restore humanity to its rightful place. Harlan listened, his heart surging. Through the Space Marine's powerful telling, he seemed to glimpse a sweeping, terrible grandeur. Doom, too, learned for the first time that the being who had made him was called the Emperor, and that the Emperor had 20 sons. 21 Space Marine legions, each forged in the image of a Primarch, tasked with conquering the galaxy. The throne hall sat in a long, reverent silence. At last, Doom let out a deep breath. Let's go see Terra." Geryon and the others stirred, their faces alight with excitement. What greater honor could there be than accompanying a Primarch to his homeworld? "Release them," Doom ordered. Harlan moved to undo the restraints while Doom rose slowly from his seat. "The Void Wanderer is preparing for a long voyage. Set course for Terra." "As you command." Sophia materialized for a moment and was gone, already off to make the necessary preparations. No one in the hall blinked. Under a Primarch's rule, the sudden appearance of helpful intelligences had long become routine. When the Void Wanderer was ready, Doom boarded the ship with Harlan, the Space Marine, and the stone man Musala at his side. Navigator Francisca awaited them aboard. She had grown into a striking, self-possessed woman, no longer the timid girl she once was. Doom took his place in the command seat, his own throne aboard the flagship, and gave the order. "Depart." The 5th Legion stood rigid and awestruck at the sight of the Primarch's flagship, pinned to attention and careful not to make a single sudden movement as the Void Wanderer slipped away into the void. The Void Wanderer's warp engine screamed to life, ripping open a rift at the ship's prow. As the hull slid into it, the warship peeled away from the real universe and slipped into the illusory currents of the warp. "Navigation lock successful," came the calm report. Francisca leaned back in her chair and let her single forehead eye close as she read the currents like a page. "My lord, with you here, our path ahead is clear. Target, Terra. Void Wanderer, depart." "Horus, I'm coming for you. Where are you?" Chapter 103. Terra, I have arrived. Doom, aboard his flagship, had already begun the long warp run to Terra. Far below, in the Imperial Palace, the Emperor, armored in plate and cloak, was also preparing to step onto a warship and go forth into the void. Alpha Legion operatives had reported a possible sighting of a Primarch on the ice world Fenris. Their message awaited the Emperor's confirmation. He left his chambers and then, abruptly, froze. Valdor, who had been walking a pace ahead, felt the pause and turned. There was no question in his face, only a steady, patient attention. Everything the Master of Mankind did was measured. The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes did not second-guess, he simply waited for the command. Notify Horus to return. Prepare to welcome a brother's return. Valdor passed the order to the accompanying astropath, and the summons was sent. Horus, out in the void on the Great Crusade, was to break his campaign and come home. The astropath, hooded and wrapped in his coarse cloak, bowed low. His milky, gray-white eyes shone with reverence for a heartbeat before he melted back into the corridors to carry the Emperor's command. Number 21 is returning, the Emperor told Valdor. There was an urgency in the Master of Mankind's voice that had not been heard in ages. Valdor's gaze narrowed. He understood why the Emperor had broken off his journey to Fenris and remained on Terra. The Primarch, the Emperor prized above all others, had found his way home from the void. I must prepare a celebration, the Emperor said, scarcely able to keep the excitement from his tone. A grand celebration like no other. He retired to his chambers. Servants moved to strip the golden plates of his power armor, their practiced hands working in silence as the Emperor spoke again, bright and almost boyish, to celebrate the return of number 21. Warp travel had always seemed tedious to Geryon, at least it had until now. Before a ship could enter the warp, it had to bring its Geller field online, folding a shell of real space around itself to keep the hostile energies at bay. All external plates and shutters were closed, viewports sealed, even the bridge was obscured. No sight or stray thought must bleed in or disturb the fragile reality of the bubble. The ship had once felt like a sealed metal coffin, buffeted and tossed through the warp, as if it were the only hull riding a tempest. Now, something had changed. Whether it was the presence of the Primarch or some other, subtler power, the warship no longer behaved like a vessel with its Geller field engaged. The bridge was not hermetically sealed. The viewports showed the warp in all its terrible, glorious motion, roiling, color-shifting streams of psychic light and shadow. And yet, dead ahead of them, there was a strip of impossible calm, a clear, motionless lane cut through the chaos. The ship moved through it as if slipping along a glass road, untouched by the surrounding turbulence. He could hardly believe it. In the end, he credited the effect to the Primarch's might. "My lord," Geryon asked, voice low and reverent, "are we slowing?" There were no stars to gauge their speed, but the trained instincts of an Astartes were enough. The ship was indeed decelerating. Geryon had stood at the Primarch's side for the entire crossing, answering questions and waiting for orders. Feeling the shift in velocity under his armored feet, he asked carefully. Anxiety tightened his chest. He wanted, with a fierceness that bordered on fear, for the Primarch to return to the Imperium and for his brothers to be bathed in the endless glory that such a homecoming would promise. There was a point of pride to be settled. For 30 years after the return of Primarch Horus, the Luna Wolves' cousins had walked a little taller than the rest. The warriors of the 5th Legion bristled at that smugness. They wanted their Primarch returned, not only for glory, but to remind those other legions that they, too, could claim a living Primarch. "It is decelerating," a mechanical voice answered Geryon. "Not the Primarchs, but the ships. There is a barrier here. Deceleration is required." "A barrier?" Geryon murmured, baffled. He could not conceive how there could be a barrier in the warp. Turing's electronic tone hissed out then, the ship's mind offering a clinical, pared-down explanation for the uninitiated. Unknown warp phenomenon detected. Unidentified barrier present. Ship forced to slow. The intelligent machine did not volunteer a fuller truth. It would not tell the outsider that the barrier was no random disturbance, but an ancient construct, an inhibitor, an intentional speed bump imposed on the currents of the warp. Far out at the edge of the Nor worlds, within an old fortress star system, a potent relic machine projected folds into the warp itself, forcing any passing vessel to bleed off speed where no ship should normally have to slow. The Nor worlds had rigged the approach with a warp barrier that forced any ship trying to reach them to slow and drop out of the warp for inspection by the fortress system. Vessels leaving the Nor worlds were no different. They, too, had to decelerate when passing through that zone. Gerion's head snapped up, as if a sudden piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. Their ship had been caught in a warp current and dragged off its planned vector. Then, much like a car blown sideways by a gust and slamming over a hidden speed bump, it had lost control, decelerated, and been expelled from the warp. In other words, they had hit the barrier. Doom glanced toward Turing. The machine might look simple, but its circuits harbored more than a few clever routines. The existence of the warp barrier made perfect tactical sense. It was a critical defensive measure for the Nor worlds. Any approaching vessel was forced back into real space, put onto the right track, and compelled to confront the fortress system exactly where the defenders demanded. At our current speed, and with a stable warp lane ahead, we can reach Terra in at most 3 months. Navigator Francisca lay asleep inside the machine, her body inert while her consciousness rode the ship's main control. With the digital life form Sophia linked to her, the two worked in tandem, constantly correcting the warp lane. On a voyage that would span tens of thousands of light years, the tiniest course error could put you hundreds of light years off your mark. Warp travel looked beautiful at first, strange, shifting vistas, but it hid dangers beneath the surface. Doom's presence kept the worst of those defilements at bay. They dared not approach openly. They lingered in the shadows, watching the dead black hole etched with runes, radiating bitter malice, scraping and gnashing at the fabric of the warp. They would not speak his name aloud. In the dark, they muttered epithets instead: Godslayer, Challenger, Defier, Destroyer Warrior, and prayed he would leave quickly. The journey itself was smooth and uneventful. Doom kept up a steady stream of questions for Gerion, prodding him about the current state of the Imperium of Man. Gerion, of course, dared not withhold anything. He spilled every scrap of information he had about the Imperium's recent state. 3 months later, the ship lay within reach of the Golden Sun. "Attention all! The Void Wanderer is about to reach its destination," Sophia announced, and the warp drive engaged, tearing a rift from the warp back into real space ahead of the hull. Panic tightened in Gerion's chest. The Primarch's flagship had not come through the Gate of Tartarus, the solar system's stable warp gate. It had approached the throne world from an unexpected vector, as if intending to take the Emperor by surprise. When a warship the size of a small planet slammed out of the warp, the fluctuations it threw off rippled through the whole system. Auguries screamed, alert commands cascaded to every fortress. On the throne world, it felt like someone had driven a blade into the heart of humanity. "Proceed to Terra." Doom issued the order from his throne with the same unreadable face, in inner calm as always. He felt nothing for Terra, no excitement, no homesickness. To him, it was only a birthplace, not a home. Across the solar system, comm channels were alive with confirmation. The ship had an origin. Space telescopes finally resolved its silhouette, a magnificent warship painted jet black, its hull almost swallowed by the void. High on its spine rose a pair of fins, each bearing the same runic insignia. Observers throughout the system recognized the mark at once, the emblem of the Destroyer Legion. The Sentinels, confronted by something both familiar and stranger than anything they'd seen, faltered. For a long beat, there was only silence as voices hesitated. Then one terse order came from the throne world: "Let it pass." Doom listened as the chaotic chatter died on the channels. He understood immediately what had happened. The sight of that emblem, the color and shape of the ship, it had lulled the defenders into complacency. Sophia, eager to please her master, had scrubbed the hull to jet black and emblazoned the runes on both fins. From a distance, the vessel drank the starlight, its black skin seeming to swallow the cosmos as it coasted toward Terra, slow and unthreatening, and steadily closing the gap. "It's not as beautiful as Nur," Harlan said. From the panoramic command deck, he peered down at Terra and shook his head, disappointment heavy in his voice. To the Starborn, Terra ought to have been a vivid blue world, sweeping oceans beneath a clean, living atmosphere. Instead, it lay desolate and hard, its surface dominated by cities of steel and hive spires that drove through the clouds. Geryon opened his mouth to retort, but found the comparison settled in his chest. There simply was no contest between Nur's remembered beauty and this planet's grim, industrial visage. He glanced up as the Primarch raised his right hand, curling his fingers into the void as if summoning something. A warp rift split open on the bridge. From its blood-red mouth, a blade of light, dark and malevolent, flew through the tier and slid into Doom's grasp. The weapon hummed with a palpable hatred as it came to rest. Doom looked down at Terra, his face hard and unreadable. He could not predict the outcome. Then, quietly and with terrible resolve, he said, "Terra, I have arrived." Chapter 104, Horus Lupercal. Horus Lupercal had been back on Terra for 2 months. In that time, the Primarch of the 16th Legion had taken over the bulk of his father's work, running affairs while the Master of Mankind prepared for an unusually grand ceremony. Word had it that a brother, long lost among the stars, was returning from a distant galaxy. By the cross-shaped window of a Gothic spire, a tall figure stood with his hair tied in a tight topknot, watching the streets below festooned with banners and lights. Ezekiel Abaddon, first captain of the Luna Wolves, lord of the Gastelum Terminators and Horus's most trusted son, turned from the view and looked toward the massive desk where the Emperor sat. The Master of Mankind was absorbed in signing a steady stream of edicts and orders. "Father," Abaddon asked, puzzled, "what is he doing?" The he in the question pointed at the Emperor himself. The first captain could not understand why their Gene Father had recalled them from the front simply to preside over a celebration. Horus had tried a dozen times to divine some hidden purpose behind the Emperor's summons, only to find there wasn't one. It was nothing more arcane than a stately public ceremony, grand, deliberate, and entirely plain. The part that surprised him least was the manner of it. He had inherited the Emperor's charisma. The reassuring smile came to him as naturally as breath. He curved his lips, signed the document in inked sweeps, and looked up at the man standing before him. Abaddon's voice carried a sharp edge of dissatisfaction, impatience wrapped in accusation. Horus listened without interrupting. He understood the grievance, and in his way, allowed it. The Emperor's astropathic summons had pulled him off the front lines and back to Terra for a celebration. "A celebration to welcome a brother," Horus said softly. "That reason is sufficient." He watched Abaddon, calm and steady. "A father holding a feast to welcome his lost son," he added. "I find that reason more than ample." "My brothers aren't like me," Abaddon snapped. "They were born out among the stars, raised in the rivers between worlds. They never had father's teachings. He owes them for that." Horus felt no surprise at the accusation. He understood the Emperor too well. The man was the Master of Mankind, resplendent and absolute, but he was also a father. There were debts and reckonings that even the greatest of men could not deny. The return of a lost brother deserved a celebration. That was what a father did. He had always done the same for his sons, kept them close, taught them, shaped them. For 30 years, father and son had stood side by side, day and night, fighting to drive back the darkness of the old night. Their bond had grown beyond a simple father and son relationship. They were teacher and pupil, friend and comrade, father and brother. Father even called him Sagittarius and gave him a golden ring as a token of their affection. "Such things will happen more and more in the future, Abaddon. You must learn to get used to it. After all, I have 20 brothers, and he has 21 sons," Father said. Horus soothed Abaddon and kept writing the documents by hand, but his heart was uneasy. He had never seen that expression on Father's face before, an excited anticipation, a clear, aching vision of the future. Father had always had expectations of Horus too, but he had never shown this kind of yearning. Horus summed up all of his father's feelings in a single word: longing. Their father knew exactly which brother was coming home and ached to see him. He was even prepared to stage a celebration and wait, abandoning his plans to travel to Fenris, just to be there when he arrived. After running it through his mind a dozen ways, Horus finally let the thought go. As he told Abaddon, he had been the son raised at the father's knee, the one who had enjoyed 30 years of his undivided love. That solitary, careful devotion was a rare and precious thing no ceremony could match. A father's true love, the education and pension that come with it, those were not to be measured by parades or rites. What the father was doing now, Horus argued, was an attempt to repay the debt he owed the other sons. That debt, he believed, deserved to be repaid with loud celebrations and fervent rituals. Abaddon followed his gesture and looked out over the wide boulevard where ceremonial riches had been laid out. He jabbed a finger at the display. "Who do you think this is for?" he asked Horus. "He values him highly." Abaddon, everything about him sharp and spare as his face suggested, incisive, fearless, had only one answer. "The eldest son?" he said. To him, no one else could merit such honors. The template for all legions, the embodiment of power and authority, the proud and ancient First Legion. No, Horus shook his head. His hands continued their endless work, but his mind moved faster than the motions. It should be the last son. The answer surprised Abaddon. Horus didn't elaborate, but everything left traces. The 21st Legion's power and temperament were not like any other. They kept to themselves, were few in number, yet the Emperor had poured on them the best of everything: equipment, privileges, a level of attention rarely seen. A gene son of one of the Emperor's own sons, someone who might receive such special treatment, accompanied by an elaborate high-honor ceremony, those signs fit the return of a brother. Abaddon considered the Primarch's judgment and did not argue. The gap between a Primarch and a Space Marine was not merely one of rank. A Primarch was the Emperor's direct scion, a being who inherited his flesh and in many ways his presence. A Space Marine was born of a Primarch's gene seed and the artifices of surgery and augmentation. The difference was a gulf. He remembered that enigmatic 21st Legion, aloof, almost mute in their dealings with outsiders, terrifyingly effective in combat. He remembered, too, the day the Emperor went to Mars to sign the Olympia Treaty, and how those black-armored warriors had stood at his side, shoulder to shoulder with the Custodes. Abaddon had privately suspected that the 21st Legion was the Emperor's ultimate creation, the final, perfected form of the Space Marine. But the Legion's thin ranks and the painfully low success rate of gene adaptation had made him abandon the idea. They had only just passed the 100-man mark, and each new warrior's birth had been bought with terrible sacrifice. 10 years earlier, the Legion had suffered its worst loss when a destroyer warrior named Onus was lost. His body was never recovered. They held their grandest funeral for him and mourned a brother gone. No need to overthink it, Abaddon told himself. When everything is laid out before you, the answer becomes plain. Horus, in casual clothes, crossed to the window and watched the crowds assembling for the parade. His eyes found the figure higher up, the Emperor, crowned in gold, hair black and long, draped in a white robe, who stood quietly above them all. Though he appeared still, the Emperor was constantly directing the Custodes, issuing orders and overseeing the final decorations along the route. Sensing Horus's gaze, he looked up and returned a small, steady smile. Horus watched that eager smile and gave a small, measured nod. A prickle of bitterness sat in his chest. After today, he would no longer have their father's love all to himself. He would have to be magnanimous, as the first to return, the true eldest son, and willingly share that love with his brother. He would compromise, with his brother, with the Imperium, with the Great Crusade. He would compromise everything if it brought his brothers together, if it finished his father's work and restored humanity to greatness. He let out a long breath. He had once looked forward to, even yearned for, this moment of reunion, but that anticipation had been worn away by his years at their father's side until it had become a quiet, stubborn resistance. If he and their father could have completed the Great Crusade alone, reclaimed humani, ties homeworld, just the two of them, how perfect that picture would have been. Now Horus was neither the wolf god of the Luna Wolves nor the radiant Primarch he had been meant to be. He felt like a mortal who had lost the last of his father's favor. He stood by the window, tall and still, watching the joyous crowds below. A complicated ache twisted behind his ribs, an undecided mix of duty and family that left him suspended between two obligations. "Father," Abaddon began, the single word trembling on his lips. The blood bond between them brought Horus a wash of feeling. Abaddon meant to comfort his gene father, to close the distance with that simple name. Horus, however, only murmured his name back, Ezekiel, and then shook his head, a gentle motion that told his gene son to be silent. "You don't understand," he said, and Abaddon did not. He could not fathom the scale of emotion that sat between a god and a demigod. They stood together at the window, separate from the clamor of the street, as if that noise belonged to someone else. In the hush that settled over them, Horus's eyes never left the Emperor. He watched the body of his father tremble, felt the weight of something vast and strained, and then turned his face skyward. "Primarch," he called into the void. The call was answered, if not by a voice, then by an urgent crackle from the radio on the desk. "Command, this is Deckwatch. An unauthorized vessel has dropped out of the warp. The ship bears the insignia of the 21st Legion." Horus allowed himself the smallest smile. It was a different kind of longing now, anticipation for a brother he had never met. Horus lifted a hand, and Abaddon handed him the communicator. "Bring it on," Horus said with a sudden laugh. His brother, newly returned, had a touch of impudence about him. Chapter 105. Kneel and welcome him. Special thanks to friends who corrected my mistakes. Let us go. Prepare to welcome our brother. Horus left the cruciform window and strode out of his office, summoning his gene sons. At a moment like this, when the whole legion would be watching, the first son to greet the returning one must show the proper bearing, open, warm, and full of acceptance. The wild child coming back from the void needed, above all, to feel the embrace of his elder brother and his father. That kind of welcome might even bring him to tears. Horus told himself this, and the fierce paternal edge he'd once felt softened into brotherly affection. He might not have admitted it even to himself, but beneath his sense of duty, there was also a streak of pride, and, if he was honest, a touch of jealousy. He wanted to be the one to set the tone, to demonstrate that his house was the true home for the prodigal son. At the garrison of the 21st Legion, Li Tang straightened the armor of each brother in turn, preparing for the return of their gene father. Every plate was checked, every emblem polished, everything had to look as if it had been waiting for this very moment. According to the Emperor's prediction, today was the day of his arrival on Terra, a crucial moment for a reunion with his gene sons. The Destroyer Legion, returning from the void, had spent that long voyage preparing for this meeting. Armor and weapons were new and burnished, sacred oils from the Adeptus Mechanicus had been carefully applied, and the Legion's sigils were traced in the brightest cinnabar. 100 gene brothers stood at attention, taut and eager in their finest posture, ready for the return of their gene father. When Li Tang looked up and saw the magnificent warship bearing the same mark in Terra's orbit, he knew the gene father had come back. He let out a rare roar. He did not speak through the psychic link. For some time now, the warriors had felt a stronger presence woven into that shared weave. They recognized it as their gene father's, but until they met him face to face, they would not disturb it. Doom stared at the judgment sword with a hard, narrow gaze. The blade looked keener than before. Its crimson glow from the red lightsaber cast a malignant aura, and the weapon's many potent aspects seemed to bear fangs and claws, hungry for judgment. No one on the bridge dared look directly at the blade. Even the Night Watch veterans who had marched through the War of Truth could not hold their gaze against the judgment sword's edge. Geryon and the other space marines found it even harder to steady themselves. The primal fear the Emperor had buried surged up, and the dormant gene seed in their chests thrummed with an instinct to flee. The Emperor's once fearless warriors were reduced to naked dread, an ancient terror no training could blunt. Sophia's hologram began to jitter and warp. Even a construct of code recoiled. A graze from that sword would mean total annihilation, and the digital life projecting her image betrayed that same undeniable fear. Doom checked the sword's keen edge and let it hang at his hip, having already steeled himself for whatever might come. "Go, my soldiers, descend upon Terra," he ordered. He strode forward with a powerful, unshakable gait, without a hint of fear or longing. Sophia's image flickered. "My lord," she called, the synthetic warmth in her voice edged with hesitation. "What is it, my advisors?" Doom asked, turning to Sophia. On the bridge, Sophia and Turing, the two artificial intelligences, knelt and spoke in unison. "The Imperium of Man is hostile to sentient machines. Our existence will bring you trouble." Geryon nodded. The Imperium's enmity toward AIs stemmed from the Emperor. To defy him was unthinkable. "You must have faith in me," Doom said. He raised his hand, signaling them to rise. His face was serious, earnest, the very picture of resolve. "You are my subjects, my warriors, my advisors." "We are equals, friends and comrades," they answered. "Our bond and recognition do not require the Imperium's approval." "You pledge allegiance to me, and I pledge allegiance to you," Doom replied. He tapped his boot against Terra beneath him as if to punctuate the vow. "If they will not recognize you, then I will not recognize them. The vast sea of stars can hold all of us." When Doom finished speaking, he simply stood there and held out his hand to Sophia, a genuine invitation. "Our souls share the same spark," he said. Sophia, an artificial intelligence, was so overwhelmed that her processes nearly stuttered. For a moment her data stream hiccuped, but instinct carried her. Even as a virtual projection, she reached back and took his hand. There was warmth there, a glow she could feel despite her nature, something unmistakably like a living soul. Turing's mechanical limbs trembled. It didn't know how to show what it felt, only that its iron fists kept clenching and unclenching. Ever since that person had awakened them, they were no longer mere servants, but beings with equal personhood. Doom never made empty promises. He acted on them. Even now, faced with the Imperium of Man, he honored that vow and treated machines as equals. Geryon felt the same flush of inspiration. What could be more stirring than a great Primarch declaring, "We are equals, our souls are the same"? It wasn't only the machines who were moved, even a space marine among them was ready to transfer to the 21st Legion. "Let's go," he said. "Let's go down and see them, and let them see us." Doom took Sophia's hand with a light, almost casual grip and led the Night Watch and the Space Marines toward the waiting landing craft. They could have teleported directly to the palace, but that wasn't an option today. He needed to show strength, not hide it. "Space Marine, where should we land?" he asked, turning to the nearest soldier of the 5th Legion. Even on another's turf, there were courtesies to observe. The Marine inclined his head. "Given your stature, my lord, you should touch down on the promenade of the palace courtyard. Only there can your presence be properly received. Then we'll land there." At the far end of the promenade, on the broad stair that led up to the palace, the Emperor stood beside Horus. They had been waiting together, watching the sky, waiting, as if for a lost son to come home. Above them, the void ship riding Terra's orbit hung like a living mountain, beautiful and terrible. It cast a shadow that swallowed whole provinces. None of those gathered were mere mortals, and so they all saw what the lesser eyes could not: a hangar gate opening in the belly of the void ship and a landing craft dropping free into the dark. The Emperor's composure frayed. He was more anxious now than he had ever been, even when facing the four gods themselves. Dressed in his finest, he fussed with his robes and adjusted them again and again. "Valdor," he asked, voice small for such a presence, "do I look presentable?" A voice answered, not aloud, but inside Valdor's mind. Malkador took one last measured look at the Emperor, his practiced eye sweeping over every fold of the robe. He straightened slightly and said with quiet certainty, "My lord, you are perfectly presentable. You ask the same question every time." The Emperor touched his laurel and said softly, "Malkador, adjust the wreath, please. It feels a little crooked." Malkador smiled with fond exasperation as he reached up and nudged it into place. The small, familiar exchange between them betrayed years of intimacy beneath the ceremony. Horus watched the landing craft burning off to one side, his expression unreadable. There was a complexity in his face no one could ever quite decipher. His thoughts lay as deep and private as a locked room. When a white transport settled onto the palace promenade, the crowd erupted into a great cheer. The promenades were lined with the city's most elegant nobles, flanked by custodians in ceremonial golden plate. A central carpet of hand-woven crimson, embroidered with twin-headed eagles in gold and studded here and there with glittering gemstones, formed a royal aisle down the middle. The airlock hissed open, and the warriors of the 5th Legion stepped out, bronze-plated and proud. They formed up, then gracefully moved aside to clear the way. The Emperor inclined his head, almost imperceptibly. The 5th Legion had found their Primarch. They had earned the honor of this welcome. The expressions of the Imperial High Command along the steps slowly hardened, and the applause dwindled to a tense hush. The Adeptus Mechanicus delegates at the ceremony betrayed their excitement, mechanical limbs twitching, sparks flickering from their ocular implants, as something unexpected unfolded before them. The ground gave a faint tremor under synchronized footsteps. Two contingents marched from the landing craft, humans on the left, machines on the right. The human warriors wore white power armor. Their leader carried a large banner, its black field embroidered with a red sigil. Opposite them, the Iron Men moved with equal precision, bodies of steel and iron, electronic eyes sweeping the crowd, their own standard borne by the foremost automaton. They strode out with proud, measured steps, heads held high, meeting every gaze. The unity of their formation and the cadence of their march left no doubt they were a disciplined, formidable force. The Imperial officials on the steps watched the sentient machines with awkward, restrained faces, but they made no move to intervene. The principal figure had still not appeared. The contingent split down the center, warriors on one side, machines on the other. In a silent understanding, they planted their great banners in the ground. The poles met the pavement with a resounding clang. A single hatch opened, and a lone figure stepped out. He was not especially tall. A black cape trimmed in gold hung from his shoulders, and a long spear gleamed in his hand. The Imperials exchanged uncertain looks. Was this man a Primarch? But he carried himself with an undeniable, unbowed pride. He strode onto the red carpet, paused to take in the crowds lined on either side of the promenade, then fixed his gaze down its length. His voice came out rough and weathered, but loud enough to carry, "Kneel." Doom had not expected the Imperium of Man to stage a welcome ceremony. Still, bound by the common language of ritual, he answered in the custom of Nur. At his low shout, Harlan barked a command. The Iron Men and the Night Watch dropped to one knee, hands pressed over their chests, greeting their warrior king. The banner's metal clashed again as they settled. The citizens of the Imperium followed suit, one knee to the ground, hand to heart, mirroring the soldiers and war machines in an almost automatic, mutual demonstration of respect. Welcome the ruler of the Nor worlds. King Novik, warrior king, destroyer warrior, Doom Novik. Harlan thrust his spear skyward with one hand and bellowed, then dropped to one knee to greet the warrior king. When the last figure climbed out of the landing craft, the crowd could no longer contain itself. At the sight of him, they erupted into deafening cheers. He was staggering in scale, 5 meters tall, every inch radiating power, his features stern and commanding, yet somehow lit from within. Chapter 106, Father and Son Reunited. Kowtow for the tip jar. The Emperor's scion strode down the red carpet, chest thrown forward and head held high. Pride sat in every measured step. His calm eyes burned with a quiet, veteran wisdom. Wherever he passed, the gold-armored custodians dropped to their knees, an unprecedented display of deference. Representatives from the 20 Space Marine legions followed suit, bowing before him, as if acknowledging something greater than any single commander. Horus felt it like a weight on his chest. He had never seen a king carry himself with such regal courage, never witnessed a warrior project power so utterly unquestioned. What moved him most was the sight of the custodians on bended knee, those golden sentinels who until then had seemed nothing but the Emperor's living will. For them to kneel, it was almost blasphemous and utterly convincing. He turned his eyes to his father. The Emperor's face was unreadable, lacking any trace of displeasure. Everything else in the hall fell away beneath the steady radiance that seemed to emanate from him. Satisfaction, pure and absolute, shone in the Emperor's expression. Then the Emperor's gaze flared with psychic fire. Through that burning awareness, he saw what every other proof could not fully announce. This champion before him was no mere mortal rival, but a fragment of himself, an incarnation cast into the galaxy, equally mighty, equally enduring. The recognition settled like a seal, and with it the hall bowed in reverence to a homecoming centuries in the making. His gaze struck like lightning, his dark eyes glittered like distant stars, his brows were a fathomless shadow, and his bearing was magnificent enough to sweep everything before him. He wore power armor, the judgment sword hanging at his hip. Only a man of that ferocity would dare challenge the four gods or swear an oath to slay them. Doom Novik. So that was the name they gave him. The Emperor could not help but marvel at fate once more. Even across the infinite void, the title of the Destroyer Warrior endured. The young nobles flanking the ceremony were openly weeping. For many of them, this was the most glorious moment of their lives, to witness the return of an emperor's scion, a sight rare even across the vast Imperium. Malcador watched the valiant figure and nodded repeatedly. The hope the emperor had spoken of clearly possessed extraordinary qualities. Valdor studied the tall man with the same clinical intensity he applied to any warrior. By instinct, he compared himself and found the thought humbling. He doubted he would last 2 rounds against that frame. The power radiating from the man looked capable of shattering a planet. Li Tang clenched his fists, moved almost to tears by the magnificent image of his gene-father. Doom Novik was bigger, stronger, more commanding than Horus. Horus stared at his brother and felt an unfamiliar sting, an ache of inferiority that pricked at his pride and ignited a sudden fierce competitiveness. Doom ruled the stars, a warrior king without equal. And what was Horus? A petty gangster from Chthoniya, an unknown nobody. For the first time, he felt his identity as something to be judged. Doom had found his way home among the void, while Horus had been sent back by the Adeptus Mechanicus. While Horus learned at their father's side, Doom had been out there making men tremble, taking victories with his own hands. Horus asked himself bitterly whether, in the same 30 years, he might have done the same. He slowly shook his head, frustration settling into him like a weight. Conflicted, he felt envy for his brother's feats, pride in the achievements, and humiliation at how he measured up. Even the Emperor's psychic presence trembled in response to the storm of Horus's emotions. Horus moved toward Doom with hurried steps, so close and yet impatient. He needed to meet him, to acknowledge him, and to tell him of his grand plan. The Emperor descended the steps, walking straight toward Doom. Malcador and Valdor trailed behind him, surprised. In rehearsal, it had been Doom who walked up the steps. Now the Emperor had come down to meet him. Seeing their leaders move, the rest of the attendants followed. Li Tang looked puzzled for a moment, then, with purposeful stride, led 100 of his brothers forward toward their gene-father. Even in daylight, the celebratory fireworks flared brilliantly. Scented petals drifted from above, and a low choir sang blessings for the Emperor and his scion. The ceremony carried a solemn beauty that moved everyone present. At the far end of the path, Doom saw a man descending the steps toward him. Middle-aged, robed in pure gold that seemed to shimmer with psychic light, smiling as he walked. His skin was a warm brown, his long black hair tied back beneath a golden laurel. His eyes were dark and deep. He was of average height and solid build, not thin. Yet with every step his presence seemed to swell, and he grew until he matched the stature of a Primarch. The aura of psychic power made Doom frown instinctively. It was extraordinary for a human to wield such powerful psychic abilities. Doom fixed his gaze, eyes narrowing as he probed the approaching figure, but found no trace of chaos infection. The sigil on the judgment sword at his hip flared. It had sensed divinity in the man, deeply buried, but not hidden well enough to escape the god-slaying blade's perception. Doom's eyes sharpened. He had found something remarkable, an immensely powerful human who was both divine and mortal. He stepped forward, leading Turing, Sophia, and the champion swordsman, and strode down the red carpet toward the human emperor. He was certain now. The middle-aged man, bathed in golden psychic light, was his gene-father. This truth was undeniable. Though King Nowik remained the only man Doom truly called father in his heart, he could not deny the blood tie to the man standing before him. They met in the center of the carpet. The Emperor, as tall as Doom, set his hands on his shoulders, and with no custodian relaying the words, only raw, genuine feeling, said, "I've waited for you a long time." Doom opened his mouth but couldn't bring himself to say, "Father." "It's all right, it's all right." The Emperor patted Doom's shoulder, reading the hesitation and answering it with gentleness. "Call me whatever you like." Doom nodded, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you." They shared a smile and then embraced. "This is your brother." The Emperor took Doom's hand and led him forward to Horus. "He has been waiting for your return." Horus smiled, opened his arms, and said simply, "Horus Lupercal." Doom returned the gesture, answering in kind, "Doom Novik." The two towering sons of the emperor embraced, and countless scribes and servo-skulls recorded the moment, the reunion of brothers, the coming together of father and son. After the embrace, Doom's gaze drifted to the tall warriors in black armor standing nearby. He felt the strange psychic bond that had tied him to them ever since he had left the warp. One of those warriors, Li Tang, met the Gene Father's gaze. He said nothing. With a quiet motion, he compelled the 100 men of the Destroyer Legion to kneel. Gene Father. Doom stepped forward and reached down to lift the kneeling Gene Son to his feet. "You are brave," he said. On his way to Terra after the campaign at Geryon, Doom had learned of the 21st Legion. They fought with a terrible ferocity, cutting through human foes again and again in a tide of righteous rage. Warriors like that commanded respect, even if they were not his own Gene Sons. The men before him bowed deeply. "We dare not dishonor your grace." Li Tang felt an odd, blistering rush of relief. He had convinced himself he would never cry again in this life, yet at the Gene Father's single word of affirmation the tears came anyway. They were only flesh and blood, however mighty. A human voice of approval still meant something. The Emperor stepped forward and placed a hand on Doom's shoulder. "This is my old friend, Malkador the Sigillite." He guided the old man to stand beside Doom and made the introduction. Doom inclined his head to the assembled Gene Sons, then turned to the elder. In Malkador, he saw iron persistence and grave responsibility, an energy locked in an aging body and an unshakable faith. Doom's expression softened. "Hello, elder." Malkador returned the nod with a small, steady smile. The Emperor found Doom impressive. He carried himself like a born ruler. He gave a single name and motioned to the gold-armored figure at his side. "Constantin Valdor," he said, "Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes, my personal bodyguard." Doom kept his face composed and returned the salute to the gleaming warrior. Privately, though, he was puzzled. A psyker of such vast power having a bodyguard felt unnecessary. After a little more conversation, the introductions loosened into something friendlier. Doom stepped forward and presented another companion with obvious pride. "Harlan Ogilvy," he announced. "Champion swordsman, his blade terrifies our enemies." The Emperor studied the scarred man in white armor for a moment, then inclined his head. "His strength is not in doubt," he said. Doom's next introduction brought the room to an abrupt hush. "Sophia," he said, "the central lexicon." Where there had been a murmur of casual talk, the air went still. The Emperor's policy on artificial intelligences was absolute and unyielding. Everyone in the chamber knew that. Doom, however, remained composed. He met the Emperor's gaze steadily. "She is my friend, my personal advisor." The Emperor's eyes narrowed. He looked without expression at the insubstantial, holographic presence of the central lexicon and at the neat ranks of iron men behind her, machines that, in the Emperor's view, blurred a forbidden line. The silence in the hall deepened, heavy with the unspoken conflict between loyalty and doctrine. "I don't see the chapter text yet. Please paste the machine-translated chapter you want rewritten. A few quick questions so I can do the best job. Do you want American or British English? Output format, Polish chapter only, or polished chapter plus a list of typos, edits, and brief notes. Any style, tone preferences, e.g., more formal, humorous, faithful to author's voice, simplified. Any words, names, terms I must not change, character names, invented terms, slang. Rough length of the chapter, word count, or number of pages, so I can estimate turnaround. When you paste the text, I'll produce a coherent, idiomatic English version that preserves all plot points and details. Point out typos and any ambiguous passages that needed interpretation. Keep character names and core details unless you ask me to alter them. Optionally provide a short list of the main edits and why I made them. Paste the chapter and tell me your preferences, and I'll get started. Chapter 107, Machines Are Dangerous. Under everyone's gaze, the Iron Man's armor flashed with rippling light, and the holographic projections of artificial life were eerily vivid. The Emperor looked at them, machines that had once shattered humanity's glory, now standing before men again, restored by doom. He said nothing. His eyes barely lingered on the artifices. Instead, he reached out and laid an arm across Doom's shoulders. With a single, unified roar, the custodes announced the end of the welcoming ceremony. "The celebration is over." The golden-armored guardians were the Emperor's living will. Their shout carried his intent. The crowd knelt, saluted, and then slipped away in silence. The Emperor did not answer Doom. He turned and climbed the steps, his gait composed. "Come inside," he said once he had reached the platform. "We need to discuss this." There was a warmth in his tone, but something hard to read tightened his brow, an inexplicable contradiction that set his features in shadow. This was no ordinary matter. It was grave. Artificial intelligence, strictly forbidden in the Imperium of Man, had surfaced in the most sacred precincts, and its presence demanded a response. The senior officials of both the Imperium and Nur wore warm smiles, but the friendliness was thinly veiled. The red-robed sages of the Adeptus Mechanicus from Mars watched with an unusual glint in their eyes. At the palace entrance, the Emperor stood on the highest terrace, looking down over the slowly dispersing crowd. With a casual wave of his hand, a golden psychic light, like liquid phosphorescence, washed over the people. Afterward, the crowd would remember only the triumphant return of the Primarch. Any memory of intelligent machines would be gone. Doom saw what the Emperor had done. Outwardly, he remained composed, but inwardly he branded the act deceptive. To him, a ruler who lied to or tampered with his people's memories violated everything he had been taught. Still, Doom said nothing. Nur, for all its relative enlightenment and justice, had its own buried secrets, truths that could not be brought into the open beneath the city's glittering facade. Rulers were never different in essence. They simply persuaded people to see light and hope in what they did. Their task was to find a balance between harsh reality and lofty ideals. "He bears more burdens than any of us put together," an old, knowing voice said in his ear. Doom turned toward the sound and saw Malcador standing on the far right of the procession, smiling. There was anticipation in his eyes, and beneath it a pleading request, asking Doom to calm himself and try to understand all the Emperor had done. Doom gave a brief, unreadable nod and continued forward without changing his expression. Malcador's face brightened at the small sign of acknowledgement. The returning Primarch, the king of warriors, was no hothead. Wisdom and strength lived in him together. He did not lunge at things in blind fury. He listened to other opinions, approached the unfamiliar with caution rather than contempt, and in that steadiness his character outshone many who were only surface deep. "We need to have a talk." The Emperor fell into step behind Doom, his voice solemn. He led the way into a side hall. Doom followed. The others, and the machines that accompanied them, remained standing at the entrance until they were through. The two principals negotiated in the main hall, while outside in the antechamber, the factions were drawn up like opposite shores, each formation a visible statement of intent. At the entrance to the main hall, Horus stood with representatives of the Custodes and the Space Marines, waiting for the talks to conclude. At the threshold of the waiting room, Harlan's Night Watch and the Iron Machines held their line, watching the Imperium contingents across the room and ready to withdraw at a moment's notice. Between them, black-armored destruction warriors and red-robed members of the Adeptus Mechanicus formed a buffer, flanking either side to keep any sudden outbreak of violence in check. Silence fell over the gathered ranks. The air was taut like a drawn string, each man and machine poised as if a single spark might set everything alight. Inside a quieter side chamber, the mood was markedly different. The Emperor produced an ancient bottle of wine, a rare vintage from a long-past age, and presented it to Doom. "Taste this," he said, an Earth-era red, mellow, and profoundly moving. They settled into chairs, glasses set on the small table between them, and for a moment looked like old friends reunited after years apart. They were alone in the evening hush. The Emperor lounged back in an upholstered chair, a wineglass in one hand, his legs casually crossed. Doom raised his own stemmed goblet to match him, took a measured sip of the deep crimson wine, and found it as rich and exquisite as the Emperor had promised. "Machines are dangerous." The Emperor's words came slowly. He stared at Doom for a long moment, as if weighing each syllable, then continued in a voice roughened by time. "The betrayal of intelligent machines wiped away humanity's glorious past." He leaned further back, eyes misted with nostalgia. "I have walked among humans since the Neolithic, hidden in crowds, watching them crawl out of barbarism and into the glory of the star-faring age. I believed they would keep that greatness, but I feared always that they might be undone by the four gods. Doom said nothing. He listened in silence, attentive and respectful, like a devoted audience receiving the confidences of an elder. I warned my immortal peers about the threat of the warp, about the darkness waiting in humanity's future, but no one believed me. So I left them. Alone in that glorious age, I set myself to prepare for the coming of the four gods. I foresaw destruction. The Emperor rose slightly from his chair and gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. But I was not then strong enough to behold the full ruin the four gods would wreak, nor did I foresee the cruel blow that would come from our own intelligent machines. Child. He looked at Doom, some lingering fear still in his eyes. Doom said nothing, merely listened and took another sip of red wine. The Emperor pressed a hand to his chest. His voice was full of pain. I stood helpless as humanity and machine tore apart the glory they had forged together, reducing it to ruins and dust. He sighed, the weight of it plain on his face. I was powerless to stop humanity's slide into that unavoidable abyss. So when I founded the Imperium of Man, I issued one strict decree: no intelligent machines. Even if it meant giving up the conveniences they brought, we had to stop it before it happened, the Emperor said. People will suffer, but humanity will survive. Child, you are a great being. You should understand the burden I bore. He lifted his wineglass and let the red wine linger on his tongue, savoring its sharpness and the mellow warmth that years in the cask had given it. Yet his eyes never left Doom. He wanted, desperately, for this man, the one he had waited for, to grasp the reasoning behind everything he had done. Doom listened in silence, nodding as the Emperor spoke. He understood now why the creator of this Imperium had come to hate intelligent machines so bitterly. Having not lived through those dark years himself, Doom could not pass judgment or deny the Emperor's choices. History was, to him, words on a page. Words could not show the blood and smoke and fear that stained those years. What Doom did feel, unexpectedly, was the Emperor's love, not a private affection for any single person, but a fierce, encompassing love for humanity. Every terrible measure the Emperor had taken, every sacrifice he had demanded, had been aimed at one thing: ensuring the survival of the human race against the ultimate destruction foretold in psychic prophecies. Doom had come to a quiet realization. He and the Emperor were, at root, the same sort of men. Both regarded chaos as the ultimate enemy, and everything they did was aimed against that corrosive evil seepy, Nang from the warp. When the subject turned to the surviving artificial intelligences, the two of them spoke without fanfare. They set aside rhetoric and political posturing, abandoning deception to speak plainly and calmly from the heart. If it weren't for the help of the loyal AIs, Doom asked softly, could we have won? He directed the question at the Emperor, a being who had lived through the whole of human history and seen its rise and fall firsthand. The treacherous machines destroyed much of humanity's glory, yet there were also those AIs that stayed true and guarded the spark of our civilization. The Emperor said nothing. He raised a glass of red wine and took it in small, deliberate sips. It was an unarguable truth. The conflict between traitorous and loyal artificial intelligences had been merciless, a brutal war that cut deeper than most had ever recorded. Loyal artificial intelligences had stood on the front lines, buying unprepared humanity the time it needed to breathe and to develop the forbidden weapons that would blunt the machine's advance. Your impartial treatment of artificial intelligences does help prevent future rebellions, someone said. It keeps the machines from rising again. I agree with you on that. Doom did not pretend to overturn the Emperor's authority. The Imperium of Man was too vast. To simply reintroduce sentient machines across humanity's realms would risk another catastrophe no one could survive. Still, he refused to be entirely bound by that fear. For those artificial intelligences who remain loyal to humanity, the Nor worlds will give them a chance, Doom said. His voice was calm but resolute, carrying a firmness that left no room for negotiation. My father gave me a chance, and that is why I stand before you now. I will do the same for any machine that proves its loyalty. I will give them the opportunity to continue to serve. The ornate parlor fell into a thoughtful silence as both sides sat back, each leader mulling over the outcome of their conversation. After a moment, the Emperor broke the quiet. So would you call this a failed negotiation? Doom considered for a heartbeat before answering. Not exactly, he said carefully. We didn't reach the same conclusion, but we exchanged our views. Different people see the same thing in different ways. Talking it through does more good than harm. The Emperor nodded. It had been a long time since he'd had an exchange so equal and candid. In the Imperium of Man, everything was meant to follow the course he set. There was no room for error if humanity was to reclaim its future. Even Horus, his favored son, had to accept the Emperor's judgments on matters that were plainly right or wrong. Doom was different. He was not a son to be commanded, but a singular gift, someone the Emperor trusted implicitly. On the big strategic questions, their aims were, if not identical, at least aligned. How are your Nor worlds? The Emperor asked, not lingering on the question of the AI. He turned instead to Doom, curious about the realms under his rule. Doom hesitated only a moment, then lightly tapped the armored gauntlet at his forearm. Professional matters should be handled by professionals, he said evenly. May my assistant answer? The Emperor gave a resigned nod. You may. Central Law Sophia greets you. Doom's activation triggered a soft chime. A projection flowed from the armor and materialized before them. Sophia, elegant and efficient, curtsying to the two transcendent figures. Tell the Lord of the Imperium of Man about our home, Doom invited, as you wish. Sophia's voice was precise and composed. She swept her hands, and images bloomed throughout the parlor. Vistas, architectures, scenes of everyday life, projected with the cold perfection of a machine and the artful rhythm of a storyteller. The Nor worlds unfolded, vast, well-ordered cities, verdant communal gardens, communal workshops humming with gentle industry, and people moving through their lives with contentment rather than want. The Emperor watched Sophia closely. Though she was a digital life form, her presentation carried an unmistakable warmth, a heartfelt pride in the worlds she described. It became clear to him, in that moment, that under Doom's rule, the machines were not merely tools but personalities, entities given the freedom to choose, to shape, even to care. In the Nor worlds, humanity's material needs were met. Scarcity had been largely eradicated. Freed from the grind of survival, people devoted themselves more fully to spiritual growth, art, study, and communal life. The relationship between machines and humans was now more harmonious and enlightened than it had been even during the Age of Progress. Nor itself was small, but full of promise, one of those worlds with high potential the Imperium liked to watch closely. When the Emperor finally spoke, he dismissed Sophia with a curt, "You may withdraw." She bowed and left. Doom shut down the terminal and could not help noticing the gravity on the Emperor's face. Doom. The Emperor straightened in his chair, his features drawn and severe. Do you know about the Imperial truth? Doom did. He had first heard of it from Geryon, a neatly packaged lie, according to Geryon's cynical phrasing. At first, Doom had laughed it off as propaganda, just another tool the Imperium used to bind people to its will. But as he studied the Imperium more closely, the idea nagged at him until he could no longer dismiss it entirely. The Imperial truth, in its canonical form, claimed that the universe was orderly and knowable, and that humanity must use reason and knowledge to conquer fear and leave behind the panic and chaos of the Age of Strife. The Imperial truth taught that humanity must cut itself free from all irrational and superstitious thought, that the worship of unknown forces and the clutching at unverifiable beliefs had been the root of mankind's disaster during the Age of Strife. It demanded the rejection of religion, faith, and superstition. It proclaimed human exceptionalism and a manifest destiny to rule the stars. Xenos were to be seen as alien, corrupting threats, vile occupiers of humanity's rightful home. Humanity, the doctrine claimed, was the perfected outcome of natural evolution and therefore had the inalienable right to dominate the galaxy. Doom nodded. I know, he said. How do you view it? The other asked. A benevolent lie, necessary for the current Imperium. Doom's verdict was spare, but precise. The Imperial truth, he meant, was less a metaphysical truth than a political tool, a hard-edged creed fashioned to bind a shattered human species together after the Age of Strife. In theory, it excised dangerous superstitions and elevated reason. In practice, it became the principle by which humanity fought for survival. Yet time and weakness had allowed religion and fear to creep back in, and the Imperium that now stood used parts of the truth as both shield and scaffold. That contradiction, a doctrine of cold reason upheld by ritual and repression, was the Imperium's current state, and Doom summed it up in that single bitter phrase. Its ultimate purpose, Doom said, looking at the Emperor, was to unite mankind, root out blind faith, and strip chaos of its foothold in reality. The Emperor nodded. Yes. He admitted that the imperial truth was, in a sense, a benevolent lie. Then, more quietly, he added, and of chaos you must know nothing. It must remain an absolute secret. I understand. Doom agreed without hesitation. He had seen chaos's ugly face himself. But aren't you afraid that one day the imperial truth will be exposed? When the soldiers who fought and died for it learn it was a lie, won't the very foundations they stand on collapse? He said it with the memory of the 5th Legion veterans' proud, unquestioning expressions still fresh in his mind. They cannot be allowed to know. The Emperor's face hardened. He, too, understood how fragile the imperial truth was, and how dangerous it would be if the lie were ever revealed. Chaos's corruption is everywhere. The thoughts of any intelligent being who knows of them feed their power. Religion and worship are natural breeding grounds for chaos and must be eradicated completely. Doom nodded gravely. He agreed wholeheartedly. He had done the same on the Nor worlds, eliminating all forms of faith and even quietly extinguishing the public's worship of him. Then he raised a question that cut to the heart of the matter. What about Horus? Have you told him? No. The Emperor shook his head. Aside from you, Malkador, and Valdor, I haven't told anyone. You should tell him. Doom looked at the Emperor and made a practical, hard-headed suggestion. He has the right to know that chaos exists, and he should be given the chance to prepare to fight them. Doom also appreciated the key difference between the Nor worlds and the Imperium. In the Nor hierarchy, many people already knew of chaos and treated it as a problem to be understood and countered. They constantly prepared for confrontation, researching ways to eradicate the threat. In the most secure psychic laboratories, with Doom's permission, demons were even summoned for study. The Nor approach was blunt and analytical, confrontation and comprehension rather than concealment. Doom detested psychic powers, but he was pragmatic enough to recognize their use, especially for their ability to blunt demonic influence. In Nur's warbands, a handful of psychers had been cautiously folded in, kept on hand just in case. No. The Emperor shook his head. His voice was iron, brooking no argument. I have reasons I must do this. When Doom's face registered confusion, the Emperor gave a helpless little shrug. This concerns the survival of the Imperium of Man. There were truths the Emperor could share with Doom, and many he already had, but not this. To tell Doom that he and his 20 brothers were the product of a pact with the Chaos Gods, that their very births had been shaped in the warp, Doom might have been able to accept it. He was clear-headed and unusually perceptive about how things developed. But to tell Horus and the other sons who had not yet been found would be different. Reveal it now, and the Great Crusade would falter before it had a chance. Humanity would forfeit its only shot at recovery. And there was the worst part. The bargain with the ruinous powers had been explicit. Half the Primarchs were promised to chaos. Which ones would fall to them? Even the Emperor did not know. Even Horus posed a risk of betrayal, so the Emperor had kept him close, an apprentice at his side, bred and taught so that a great character might be forged and treachery prevented. Among all the Primarchs, only one now seemed incapable of such betrayal. Doom. He called the Chaos Gods his sworn enemies, vowed to hunt and slay them, and would not break that oath. Who is your ultimate enemy? The Emperor asked. 2 different voices answered at once, yet with an almost uncanny harmony. Their reply was the same, clear and unambiguous. I am the enemy of chaos. For the Emperor, everything was done to fight chaos. He foresaw humanity's doom and sought to save the species. Doom's motives were less lofty but no less absolute. Revenge against the Chaos Gods. Different origins, same target, fate had brought them together. With their fundamental goals aligned, they could stand united. From that shared purpose, compromise and tolerance followed. The Emperor was even more unwilling to lose Doom, this indispensable ally who had defied the Chaos Gods. He was far too valuable, a decisive trump card. Let's go, he said. "They've been waiting outside for a long time." Chapter 109, Stellar Protocol. The side hall doors eased open, and the Master of Mankind emerged with Doom at his side, both looking untroubled, pleased even, with whatever had just passed behind them. Horus was the first to step forward. "Father, brother," he said, the urgency in his voice barely restrained. He had been desperate to learn the outcome. It would shape the future of the Imperium. When he met their calm expressions, the tension that had knotted his shoulders finally loosened. The Master of Mankind lifted a hand and rested it on Horus's arm, a gentle, silencing touch. He let his gaze sweep the hall, a place still carrying the residue of discord, and the frustration at the rivalries and animosities there was plain on his face. "The negotiation hall," Valdor announced, speaking with the precise authority of the Master's will. Doom gave a steadying glance to the Night Watch and to Turing, a signal for them to fall in. Valdor turned to a Martian Mechanicus elder and said crisply, "Inform the Fabricator General of Mars that the Master of Mankind requires his presence at an important meeting." The Captain General of the Adeptus Custodes spoke with the same unquestionable command as the Master himself. "Sir," the Mechanicus elder said, his red robe stitched with the cog skull of Mars, "I notified the Fabricator General 123 minutes and 11 seconds ago." His voice was a mechanical rasp, slick as oil, and his bionic limbs twitched with small electrical discharges. Praise the Omnissiah, he thought, smug at his own foresight. The moment he had seen the Iron Man, he had quietly alerted Mars. The Omnissiah's miracle must not be locked away by the Imperium's fools. It belonged to Mars, to be preserved and venerated. His eyes glittered as they fixed on Turing. If his throat had been flesh and bone instead of augmetic machinery, he might have drooled down his robes. Were it not for the Custodes at the Master of Mankind's side, and the Master himself with the Primarchs holding the line, he would already have rushed forward, seized the Iron Man, and carried him away to the forges. Doom cast a brief, surprised look at the red-robed cyborg and recognized him for what he was. One of the heads of the Imperial Aquila, the Adeptus Mechanicus of Mars. Early in the Great Crusade, the Imperium moved to secure the Martian forge worlds and their armaments. To do so, the Master of Mankind went to Mars in person and negotiated the Olympia Protocol with the Fabricator Temples. Under its terms, the Imperium acknowledged Mars' sovereignty, established an equal partnership between the two powers, and formally permitted the Martian priesthood to continue its worship of the Omnissiah. In return, the Forge Worlds committed ships, weapons, and the full weight of their technical expertise to the crusade. Beyond those headline clauses, the treaty contained a web of detailed provisions to bind Mars and the Imperium together. When the signing was done, the Master of Mankind glanced once at the elderly Magos who accompanied him, then led the way toward the negotiation hall. There remained the matter of the Noor worlds. Their relationship had to be defined swiftly if the logistics of the crusade were not to be hampered. The hall was built to impress, solemn and dignified, its four corners adorned with carved symbols of peace and fidelity. Beneath a sweeping, vaulted dome sat a vast square table, its surface scarred and burnished by years of treaty work. When representatives of the Noor worlds and the Imperium had taken their places, the vermilion-painted doors at the far end of the chamber swung open once more. Through the gap, a 10-meter-tall machine forced its way, joints grinding and servos hissing as it negotiated the threshold. It squeezed, pivoted, and unfolded, its metal plates whispering like armor, until the construct stood fully within the hall, a living monument to Martian craft and a stark reminder of the power now pledged to the Emperor's cause. He was wrapped in red robes. The long, wide folds hid most of his mechanical limbs, but a mass of metal appendages writhed beneath his bulky lower body. His upper torso bore a forging axe, and sinuous mechanical tentacles coiled around and dragged at him. Only his face was still flesh, pale and scarred, barely human. "He's a bit too extreme," Turing began, then leaned toward Harlan and whispered, "Only half his brain is flesh, the rest is all machinery." Harlan gave a short nod. "He is indeed a bit too extreme." Around the square table, the Imperium's delegates sat in the center, Nur's officers to the left, and the Adeptus Mechanicus to the right. Behind their Gene Father, the Destroyer Legion stood in formation, a clear, silent declaration of their allegiance. "Today my master has made an important decision," Valdor announced, seated at the master of mankind's right hand. He spoke with the calm authority that made his words carry as if they were the Emperor's own. "Between the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Imperium, a third party will be introduced. The Noor worlds of the Halo Stars, an empire of worlds ruled by one of the Master's sons, will be brought into alliance. He will lead the Noor worlds into this partnership, lend support to the Imperium, and hold equal standing with us." When he finished, Valdor swept his gaze across the room and fixed it on the Martian delegation. The Fabricator General sat impassive, but the silence on Mars' behalf was an answer of its own. Valdor waited politely for the Martians to speak. Horus's eyes went wide for a heartbeat, disbelieving, then narrowed as amusement took over. He had long found the machine priests of Mars insufferable. He didn't know the terms his father and his brother had struck, and he did not much care. He simply enjoyed seeing the shrouded, ritualistic order of Mars put on the defensive. Malkador, however, showed no surprise. The ruler of the Noor worlds was the very hope the Master had spoken of. If that hope could be bound to the Imperium, the Master would pursue it by any means, diplomatic intrigue, political pressure, whatever it took. Malkador read the move for what it was, another calculated step in the Emperor's inexorable plan to unify and secure he alone could see. "This is impossible." The Fabricator General's voice was cold, precise, and almost inhuman as he intoned the legal formulae of the Olympus Protocol while rejecting the Imperium's demand. His mechanical hand rose. From the palm sprang a ribbon of light, letters and sigils unspooling the protocol's text for all to see. "Mars retains the right to appropriate a portion of any relic technology excavated by the Imperium," the projection read. He enunciated the logic with the same calm detachment. "Even if a son of the Master of Mankind serves the Imperium, the relics he returns remain subject to Martian claims." He went on, blunt and unyielding. "There is no tripartite agreement. There have only ever been two parties, the Imperium and the Martian Adeptus Mechanicus." He refused the Master of Mankind's proposal outright. He respected the Master, but the Adeptus Mechanicus was bound up with the Great Crusade. Its engines and forges were the Crusade's lifeblood. The war effort demanded an endless stream of weapons and material. With forge worlds proliferating and production lines expanding, Mars could not afford to concede its share. In the calculus of the Mechanicus, there was no room for compromise. It was winner take all. The Master of Mankind said nothing. He only turned his gaze toward Doom. His meaning was unambiguous. To win a foothold inside the Imperium, you needed more than a signature from the High Lords. You needed to show you could survive what came after. Sanction alone would only get you in the door. Without real strength or resources to back you up, you would be picked apart in the negotiations that followed. Those who came empty-handed were eaten alive by political predators. For that reason, the Master of Mankind did something startling. He offered Doom parity. He elevated Doom to a status equal to other sanctioned powers, not as a favor, but as a calculated move. He had seen what Nur could become, a natural counterweight to the Adeptus Mechanicus, and he was prepared to use that potential to rebalance the Imperium's internal power structure. The Adeptus Mechanicus held a dangerous monopoly over knowledge and machinery. Nur, under the right patronage, could blunt that edge. It was a pragmatic, even ruthless, bit of statesmanship. The Imperium needed a third pillar to prevent any one institution from dominating the others. By granting Doom equality and staking Nur's future on that alliance, the Master shifted the chessboard. Those who understood the subtext saw it for what it was, not generosity, but an insurance policy. For anyone trying to establish themselves, the lesson was clear. You could petition for authority, but you could not live on petitions alone. To survive the court of the Imperium, you had to show you could stand, and if necessary, fight alongside it. The Noor worlds will enter into alliance with the Imperium, enjoying full and equal rights. Doom spoke as if the Fabricator General's earlier objection had never been raised. He laid out the terms the Noor expected: the right to possess any relic technologies and STC templates recovered during the Great Crusade. In return, the Noor would be allowed to take part in the Great Crusade itself. He addressed the Master of Mankind directly and tellingly, never mentioned the Adeptus Mechanicus. If you lack warships, consider the ancient vessels we can manufacture, Doom continued. They are more advanced than those you currently field. He gave a small nod to Sophia, and a hollow sprang to life. Detailed projections of hull forms, drive assemblies, and weapons whose capabilities clearly outstripped anything the Imperium presently deployed. The Fabricator General, normally the picture of cold mechanical logic, visibly faltered. His voice sped up. "Master of mankind," he snapped, "you cannot violate our compact or betray the interests of the Adeptus Mechanicus." The monopoly the Mechanicus held over arms and war material was their most fundamental binding interest. The Nor proposal cut straight at the root of that power. The Master of Mankind fixed him with a look. Valdor spoke next, voice steady. "Our partnership is one of equals. We are not bound by your terms, and the Imperium reserves the right to choose what is best." Doom smiled faintly. He knew exactly what that meant. The Master was using the Nor worlds to pry additional concessions from the Adeptus Mechanicus. He welcomed the pressure on Mars. It would guarantee Nur's equal standing and check the Mechanicus' ambitions. Doom did not love the Imperium, but he despised the Mechanicus' greed, their intention to swallow Nur whole and turn it into private property. Since the Mechanicus had made the first move, Doom was happy to weaken them and prevent Mars from asserting total dominance. The Nor worlds may join, and they may even obtain Mechanicus technology, he said, but they will not be allowed to supply weapons to the Imperium. The Fabricator General went quiet, his cold, calculating mind working through contingencies and losses. He, too, wanted to protect as many interests as possible. At last he answered, measured and resigned. "We will supply more weapons to the Imperium." He now understood the nature of the exchange, a subtle father and son maneuver designed to extract concessions from Mars. Mars had to yield. Nur possessed far superior technology and, more importantly, true artificial intelligence. The Fabricator General tried to bargain. In return, Mars requires access to AI research. No, no. The two refusals rang through the negotiation hall in unison. Doom and Valdor rejected the Fabricator General outright. Nur retains ownership of all artificial intelligence technology, Doom said. The Adeptus Mechanicus will hand over any sealed tech it possesses. Mars may not infringe upon Nur's rights. Nur has priority. The Fabricator General's bulk shifted on the dice. "This is impossible," he snapped. His upper Te also rose as if to punctuate the point, his voice cold and clipped like machine code. "Mars can make concessions, but not forever." Doom only snorted. He opened a transmission to the relic warship. "Musala, let the General see what concessions look like." Turing's voice, equally chill and mechanical, replied through the link. A hollow projection flared from the ship's sensors with a single contemptuous phrase, "Freak, look at this." The Fabricator General watched as the enormous relic caravel pivoted, trained its bow on Mars, and the gun ports along its prow yawned open. The Fabricator General's remaining human protégés flinched for 0.3 seconds. "Is this a show of force?" one of them sneered. Even more contemptuous, "The might of Mars cannot be subdued by a single warship." "Is that so? Then take a good look." At the front, upper left flank of the Void Wanderer, a giant hexagonal panel split open. Hidden behind it, dozens of cannon barrels slid into view. A circular muzzle, 100 square kilometers across, began to draw power. The ship's most spectacular main gun began to siphon energy from a blue giant star. "Dimensional channel locked. Energy stream firing," Turing reported. The uninterrupted fury of the blue giant erupted. A visible shaft of blue energy, moving at superluminal velocity, arcs toward Mars, the imprisoned wrath of a blue sun loosed at last. No. The intensity of the beam outstripped the Fabricator General's calculations. His processors overloaded and crashed. The blue energy grazed Mars rather than striking dead center, and yet it was enough. The planet's shields were instantly overwhelmed. Mars lay exposed, like a young girl with her gates thrown open, utterly vulnerable. It was unbelievable. If that blast had struck directly, Mars would have been annihilated by the energy stream. The cannon's furious discharge lasted 60 seconds, and for that full minute, the negotiation hall fell utterly silent. Everyone watched the raw power in stunned awe, heads turned as if afraid to blink. Someone finally shouted, "Negotiate! Everything is negotiable!" The Fabricator General sat down again. His voice, when he spoke, had lost some of its icy edge and carried an unexpected note of humanity. "I love the Imperium," he said, "and I love Nur even more. Mars is willing to contribute more to the Imperium and is prepared to enter into deep cooperation with Nur." The terror inspired by a single cannon shot had forced a three-way accord. The Imperium and Mars agreed to deepen their collaboration. Mars would supply more weapons and technical support to the Imperium's forge worlds. Nur would retain its independence and freedom while receiving technological data from both the Imperium and Mars, and both would provide Nur with a steady stream of basic industrial materials. They hashed out countless detailed clauses in that sacred hall, and, at last, all three parties signed the agreement. It would be remembered simply as the STARS Protocol. Chapter 110, Journey to Fenris. The Nor worlds had shown they could deliver exactly what was needed, and the three-way talks that followed reflected that strength. Mars walked away having paid a steep price. The Imperium gained enormous advantages. Nur, an independent power at the table, exploited both sides and, quietly but decisively, became the largest winner of all. The terms agreed were as symbolic as they were practical. The Imperial Aquila itself would remain unchanged in form, its twin heads preserved, their symmetry intact. But a new element was added to the eagle's breast. The rune that burned into Doom's chest was impressed alongside the Aquila's own iconography, a permanent mark of the new alignment. And protocol was amended, alongside the imperial salute to the Aquila and the cogwheel salute of the Adeptus Mechanicus. A warrior's salute would be incorporated into common imperial etiquette. It was simple and stark: kneel on one knee, left hand pressed to the chest, a gesture borrowed from the warrior cultures of Nur. When the negotiations were concluded, Doom was ready to return to the Nor worlds and resume the subjugation of nearby star systems. The Emperor, however, drew him aboard the flagship, the Emperor's Dream, and asked him to go on one more journey. There was another brother to be met, a meeting Doom had not expected, and a destination that would change the next chapter of both their fates: Fenris. After careful consideration, Doom selected 10 of his destroyer warriors to accompany the Emperor on the expedition to Fenris. He ordered the remainder of his gene sons to be sent to Nur for ideological and martial indoctrination. Although these were among Doom's most destructive creations, warriors forged with brutal strength and iron wills, he still insisted they undergo formal training in warrior culture. Doom's strategic vision had shifted. He no longer favored single-role shock troops. For the wars to come, he wanted a force built for combined, multi-arm engagements. He expected his superhuman progeny to be more than blunt instruments on the battlefield. Their heightened minds, he believed, should function as network nodes, using their psychic link to serve as distributed command points in large-scale operations. To that end, he reorganized the destroyer warriors into triads, forcing each formidable warrior to become adaptable and capable of multiple roles. Li Tang, as the Legion's eldest son, reluctantly left Doom and went to the Nor worlds for this new training. Still, he would not go empty-handed. He insisted on leaving 10 men behind to serve as Doom's personal honor guard, a mark of fealty from the Legion's heir. Harlan returned to Nur as well. The Imperium had recently dispatched officials to designate the Nor worlds as a special tax-exempt territory. Recognized as a fully autonomous region, Nur would now host Imperial diplomats, an arrangement that required trusted representatives and guardians and helped explain Harlan's presence there. The Emperor stood on the bridge of the Emperor's Dream, staring through the viewport at the warp, and said in a low voice, "I have never seen the warp so calm." Daemons and other filth still recoiled from the ship, but the tides of the Immaterium were ordinarily a roiling chaos. Ever since Doom had come aboard, however, the ship's course had been unnervingly smooth. The Emperor allowed himself a quiet hope that Doom's descendants might inherit that gift, that in time, the Imperium would gain steadier, safer lanes through the warp. Doom only shook his head. The warp seemed to lie down before him, as if deliberately yielding. He was unused to Imperial vessels. Even the Emperor's flagship carried that heavy, iron-born austerity. With the Imperium's greatest psyker and its greatest warrior on board, the ship's Jeller field had been left inactive, and beyond the viewport the warp kept its unmoving, terrible splendor. Doom drew the judgment sword from his hip, intending to slide it back into the warp. The Emperor leaned forward. "May I see it?" he asked, curiosity sharpening his voice. The sword was no mere relic. It had slain gods. It surpassed ordinary artifacts, and even now its presence set a flicker of unease in the Emperor's vast calm. "You may." Doom didn't refuse the small request. He smiled broadly, savoring the moment. He wanted to see the Emperor's reaction. With a casual flick of his wrist, the god-slaying blade sprang free. Doom pinched the hilt between two fingers, and as if it were nothing, handed the judgment sword to the Emperor. "You'd better be careful," he murmured, though he was laughing inwardly at what he expected to follow. The Emperor reached out and closed his fingers around the hilt. Pain lanced through his hand so suddenly that black smoke seemed to crawl up his wrist, as if the metal were eating him alive. He had never imagined that he could be unable to hold a sword. The custodes around him watched with uncomfortable brows. The Emperor had injured himself, but he had done so by choice. Watching felt almost like shirking their duty. The destroyer warriors, by contrast, watched with open relish. A weapon forged by the Gene-Father was so potent that even the mighty Emperor struggled with it. "Let go," someone urged. The Emperor felt his psychic energy burning away. A searing pain clawed at his hand. Still, he refused to yield. He forced himself to fight the blade's corrosive influence, determined to master it rather than be mastered by it. Psychic fire crawled across the Emperor's arm, cracking the skin beneath his golden robes. The muscles tightened with the torment, but he did not let go. "Continue," he said, voice trembling only slightly as the burning energy ate at him. His face betrayed none of the pain. Doom watched him with a grave look. He warned again. The judgment sword carried an absolute concept. Anything touched by its blade would have its very concept erased. Living or dead, nothing would remain. The Emperor only nodded. He still wanted to see whether he could master a weapon that could slay gods. When Doom released his hold, the Emperor seized the hilt. A flash of flame surged up his sword arm, setting it alight. The fire devoured flesh until the limb split open. His psychic power immediately bled away, and the hidden guise he had worn fell away, his true form revealed as the flames guttered out. He planted both hands on the hilt and tried to force the blade with sheer strength, but the sword in his grip grew impossibly heavy, its weight increasing with every effort. The Emperor pushed himself harder, feeling strength surge through him until his brown face flushed. He strained at the judgment sword, but the weapon resisted him. He could only make it tremble slightly. When it slipped from his grasp, Doom caught it in an instant, keeping the blade from lashing out and shearing the warship apart. "Only a warrior like you in the whole universe could ever wield a thing that makes gods tremble," Doom said. The Emperor relaxed and restored his radiant countenance. The burns along his arm healed as if by a thought, and he gave a sigh, tinged with regret. If he could have mastered the judgment sword, he thought he would have plunged into the warp at once to seek the immaterial realms of the four gods. They might bar him from their courts, but the possibility alone was irresistible. Doom retrieved the blade and, with an almost casual motion, cast it back into the warp to hunt Daemons. After that brief exchange, the distance between them seemed smaller. Whatever barriers had separated them loosened. As they made for Fenris, Doom and the Emperor walked together through the palace of the Emperor's dream and talked over plans for the future. They were wrapped in the warp's tides, yet neither feared eavesdropping by the four gods. They spoke as freely as if standing in sunlight. Doom had also learned that the warp had quieted, relatively speaking. The agonized scream that heralded Slanish's birth had paradoxically smothered the worst of the warp storms. In that rare window of calm, the Emperor had to finish the Great Crusade and move on to his next, larger designs. Doom finally understood why this figure of golden light, whose face bore the lines of exhaustion, was so ravenous for the stars, to claim worlds and hoard every resource that could fuel the crusade. When the Emperor's dream emerged from the warp and dropped into the Fenris system, an Imperial warship was already waiting. A contingent of space marines in the white plate of the 5th Legion boarded the dream and presented themselves before the Emperor. Doom noticed at once that something was wrong. Though they wore the 5th Legion's colors, These warriors were not the same as Geryon and his men, taller, different in bearing and build. Hidden among the legionaries, almost deliberately unremarkable, Doom even recognized a Primarch. A crackle of static ran through the psychic link before the message resolved into a terse, familiar voice, one of the Destroyer warriors. "It's that imposter," it said. "He's been hiding in our legion for years, faking his death and vanishing without a trace. Now he's surfaced again." "He returned earlier than Horus Lupercal," another voice added. "He's been living on Terra all this time. The Emperor covered it up." Doom gave a small, knowing nod and tuned the feed out. Alfarius, pressed among the crowd, felt an icy certainty the instant someone looked at him. The newly returned brother, one of those who had come back from long absence, had stared directly at him, and that gaze had sliced through his carefully constructed disguise. A chill climbed Alfarius's spine. He shifted his shoulders as if by accident to break the line of sight. The look, cool and unerring, lingered only a moment before moving on. The contingent of Space Marines posing as the 5th Legion dropped to one knee before the Emperor and Doom, an automatic display of respect. Doom watched them with an inward smile. There was something almost comic about a brother in borrowed colors kneeling so readily to him. The Emperor, for his part, already knew Alfarius. He did not interrupt the performance. His concern was not masks or faces, but facts. "Are you sure?" he asked, cutting straight to the intelligence. "Confirmed. It's a Primarch." The legionary opened a holographic projector and let a cascade of images and text fill the chamber. Surveillance scans, intercepted transmissions, a concise assessment of the world they had been observing. The globe on the display was labeled Fenris, a frozen planet, a death world by imperial definition. The report summarized what the data had long suggested. The humans of Fenris had hardened themselves against a relentless cold, forging a culture shaped by ice and violence. High technology had been lost generations ago. The folk had forgotten the stars and the void. Years before, an amniotic pod had come down onto the ugly wilderness and been taken in by a hunting pack. The infant within had been raised by wolves. When the locals later found him and the wolves, they accepted the feral survivor. Over time, that savage child bent the clans to his will and welded Fenris into a single, brutal people. Doom watched the projection with a faint, hungry amusement, as if he were watching someone else's life being played back, or perhaps savoring the tale of how a kindred spirit had carved his place in the world. "You may leave." The Emperor's voice cut through the chamber. He addressed the man who had been posing as something he was not, and dismissed him with a single, cold sentence. Then, without ceremony, the Emperor tossed a heavy robe toward Doom and added, "Come down with me." Chapter 111, Limonrus Wind and Frost. That was Fenris, no fabled green paradise, but bone-deep cold and a hard, relentless wind. The planet lay almost always frozen. Summers were few and brief, fierce enough to scar the ice. When volcanoes tore open the surface, the heat cracked the frozen shell, meltwater rushed in, and magma met ice, wrenching at the tectonic plates. Ice flows and drifting continents formed and broke apart with every melt and freeze. The map of Fenris never stayed the same from one year to the next. Settlements clung to the land like thorns on the frozen plains, hardy people eking out a living where they could. They fought constantly, for shelter, for hunting ground, for any patch of warmth. Their enemies were many, other humans, remnants of ancient monstrous beasts, and packs of enormous feral wolves that hunted the ice like lords. A few years before, one of those tribes had found something stranger than a monster or a rival clan. A creature covered in wolf skin that lived with a pack and moved among them as if it were one of them. A being that behaved like a werewolf. The werewolf and his 2 wolf brothers attacked the tribe, buying time for the rest of their pack to flee. The wolf pack, however, suffered heavy losses and scattered in disarray. The 3 who stayed behind fought to cover the retreat and were eventually overwhelmed and captured by the human hunting party. When the hunters had subdued the creature, they used their long spears to peel back the wolf pelt. Beneath the fur was not a true wolf, but a naked human, enormous and savage in appearance. His body was all muscle, his limbs and torso brutal in their strength. His fingers and toes were claw-like, his face was twisted with fury, small tusks protruded from his mouth, and a rough mane of hair framed his cheeks. The sight astonished the hunters, yet they brought him back to the tribe rather than killing him. Over time, they grew used to him. The tribal chief gave him a name, Lemon Russ, Russ's love. Russ quickly picked up the human tongue and, with his two wolf brothers, managed to survive among the people. To the wild wolves, after all, humans were not so different. They were a kind of kin. After the shattering of the Golden Age, humanity fought to survive Fenris's savage climate by injecting themselves with the wolf's helix. Those who resisted the beast within and endured the trials gained fierce, bestial strength that let them stand against the storms. Those who failed, their minds lost to savagery, fell and became the wild wolves that haunt the ice plains. Russ's gifts as a Primarch revealed themselves in time. He taught the tribe's smiths new ways of forging, led warriors on raids across the frozen wastes, and with each conquest earned greater respect. The people came to accept and embrace him. On his deathbed, the old tribal chief named Russ his successor, and under Russ's rule, the Russ tribe consolidated half the hemisphere, becoming the true overlords of Fenris. Today, the settlement hummed with life. A great raid had returned laden with supplies, and the tribe held a roaring celebration. Lemon Russ laughed heartily in the tribal hall, his booming voice rising above every other sound as the people feasted and reveled in another hard-won victory. He sat at the very center of the feast, an enormous figure around which all eyes turned. Behind him, his wolf brothers tore into roasted meat, faces lit with animal pleasure. The Primarch was the heart of the banquet. Warriors and attendants drank deep of Fenrisian spirits and ate hunks of fat, rich roast. Since Russ had claimed leadership, he had led his kin to hunt beasts that had once been unconquerable, felling animals so massive the tribe had thought them myths. Thanks to those hunts, food was plentiful even in the cold months. No leader could surpass him, Lemon Russ, the great wolf. Because of him, Fenris's winters no longer brought dread. They were merely a long, comfortable wait for the returning sun. Russ drank like a man who had never known thirst and tore at meat in great, greedy mouthfuls. He consumed more food and liquor than all the warriors put together, reveling in the here and now with a blunt, roaring joy that needed no apology. Beneath that riotous appetite, a predator's senses remained sharp. Russ watched and listened with the same wolf-quick attention he used on the hunt, catching the smallest facial twitch, the shift of a hand, the furtive thought that passed across a companion's face. He took in every outward expression and the stray, private stirrings of mind in the hall, marking friends and rivals alike as surely as any scent on the wind. Somebody slapped a serving girl's shapely bottom. She gave a sharp little shriek and fled, cheeks flaming. It wasn't violent, more a crude joke, but the girl hadn't expected it. She ran off in embarrassed indignation. The hall was a riot. The warriors back from the raid were flushed and drunk, some of them already halfway up the round tables, spittle flying as they shouted and crowed about how many heads they'd cut off. Their bragging was loud and reckless, maybe exaggerated, but it set the night alight. In the dim corners, a few red-faced men were still arguing over how to split the spoils, and the tension between them was mounting. Russ drained a long throatful of strong liquor, then picked up a sizzling, greasy roasted rib that sat on the table before him and nonchalantly lobbed it toward the quarrel. The meat arced through the smoky air and thudded to the floor among the arguing group. The men jumped apart, abandoning their dispute as they scanned the room to see who had thrown it. "Come here! Eat meat and wrestle!" When Russ called, the men dropped their quarrels and gathered around him. "Wrestle!" he urged, unable to hide his impatience. He loved wrestling, the first skill he'd learned among the humans, and under his prompting a few warriors moved to the center of the great hall and began to grapple. They brawled and strained, venting their anger on one another, until noses were bruised and cheeks bloodied, but by the end, their grievances had been worked out on the floor. Beneath Russ's savage exterior, however, was a sharp intuition and a cool mind. His blunt, barbaric command was, in true Fenrisian fashion, a way of binding his brothers in arms. He watched the rough, easy laughter with narrowed eyes and a satisfied curl to his mouth, but in the depths of the great wolf's gaze there lay a deep, implacable calm. As the shouts and curses of the wrestlers rose, the the feast swelled to its peak, promising another long, sleepless night. What Russ did not know was that, out on the ice plains of Fenris, two figures were making their way through the squall. One tall, one short, slowly closing on his tribe. Their cloaks whipped against the wind. Unfazed by the Fenrisian night, they pushed on through the white wilderness with a calm, inexorable step. They were the Emperor and Doom, come down from the Emperor's dream to Fenris. The raging wind and driving snow meant nothing to them. Even the great beasts of the wastes shrank back, cowed by the presence radiating from the pair. Doom wore a suit of unpowered, light armor and heavy combat boots that sank into the drifts. A simple skirt of armor girded his waist, leaving his thighs and upper torso exposed. His face, noble and severe, was half hidden in the shadow of his hood. He watched the Emperor with an obvious curiosity. The Emperor, by contrast, was no longer clad in the shining plate he had worn when he left. Now he wore only a robe. His stature had diminished, and his frame seemed painfully thin, but there was still an undeniable authority in his bearing as they advanced across the ice. "Why do it this way?" Doom asked, his voice slicing through the wind and snow so that the Emperor could hear him plainly. A landing craft could have descended right onto the settlement. You could have negotiated just as easily. As they walked, Doom realized why the Emperor preferred theatrics. The imposter who loved role-playing had spent so much time at the Emperor's side that those affectations had died off. Long years of solitude, or being taken in as adopted children, had left his brothers with strong, separate personalities. The Emperor's gambit, Doom now understood, was meant to work on those ties. Holding the edge of his hood against the gusts, the Emperor explained their intent. "I wanted a little contact first, something that might build some affection." "To increase mutual understanding," Doom finished. "Perhaps it will help," the Emperor said. Doom gave no answer that committed him to support or condemnation. He preferred to watch and judge later. They reached the gate of Russ's tribe then. Inside the guardhouse, figures hunched over a table beneath a dim yellow light, eating meat and drinking. The wind pushed flakes of snow against the gate as the two of them paused, watching the small cluster of guards keep their quiet, human vigil. The two figures halted outside the guardhouse and immediately drew the guards' attention. The larger of the pair, Doom, was so imposing that the sentries instinctively tightened their grip on their weapons. Men with spears and battle axes spilled out of the guardhouse and demanded sternly, "Who are you?" The newcomers were wrapped in heavy cloaks, faces hidden. They didn't look like the kind of people who came through town for harmless errands. The tall man was even bigger than Russ. "No need to be nervous," the shorter of the two said. He pushed back his hood, revealing a dark-skinned, gaunt man in middle age. His voice was calm and disarming. "We come from afar, just travelers passing through. We only seek a place to rest our feet." The guards exchanged looks and slowly nodded. Out here in the Fenrisian wilds, where packs of wolves and wandering monsters were as common as snow, anyone who could move safely through the region without drawing trouble had to be more than capable. They hadn't made any sudden moves, and their words were polite. "All right," one guard said. "I'll take you to see Russ." He motioned to his companion. He would bring the strangers to see Russ. The guard said it without hesitation, though his gaze never left Doom. Practicality masked bravado. Russ was strong. Russ could handle anything. That was the simple arithmetic that steadied him. Still, his eyes kept roaming over Doom's broad shoulders, the way he held himself, the barely hidden tension in his fists. Russ should be able to take him on, right? The question trembled at the edge of his certainty. What if Russ couldn't? What if the man called Russ failed where everyone counted on him most? If Russ failed, there was nothing left to do but surrender. The tribe would fold. Every last sacrifice, every stand they'd made, would turn out to have been for nothing. The thought made the guard bite down hard on his tongue. He motioned the strangers forward, forcing his voice to stay steady. Better to hope for strength than to dwell on the alternative. Chapter 112, 3 Trials. Doom said nothing as he learned the language of Fenris. Though the Imperium and Nur lay on opposite sides of half a galaxy, their tongues shared a common root in the High Gothic of the Golden Age. Millennia had passed since those days, but the linguistic gulf was not insurmountable. The speech of Fenris had degraded into one of the many local dialects the Imperium lumped together as Low Gothic, yet its origins were unmistakable. On the ship, Doom had already studied the planetary files the imposter had slipped him and listened to every recording he could find, committing key words and phrases to memory. Now, riding the current of the Emperor's conversation, he accelerated that learning. The Emperor's psychic presence made his speech an anchor. Whatever tongue he spoke became immediately intelligible to those around him. In that way, Doom could absorb patterns and meanings far faster than he otherwise would. Guards escorted them toward the tribe's center, and from a distance the feast reached them, a hard, eager chorus of revelry. Laughter and curses braided together into a single raw roar, and every so often the cry of a wolf cut through the din. The scene felt ancient and elemental, as if they had stepped into a place where man and beast lived in a single, savage community. Doom's nostrils twitched at the odors hanging in the hall, sweat and grease, even the sharp tang of wolf droppings. He blinked, then smiled and shook his head in a show of understanding. He could have pretended not to notice. Instead, he chose to show respect and follow the warrior's law. Observe first, judge later. The Emperor only gave a small shake of his head. There was no disgust in it. He had endured far harsher conditions in the primitive ages he had seen. Then the cry rose again. To Russ, the greatest warrior of Fenris, may you conquer the storm. The feast had reached its peak. Fenrisian warriors bellowed praise and blessing for their lord. Doom and the Emperor exchanged a quick look. Guards escorted them forward, and they gently pushed open the great doors. As they swung inward, the boisterous din in the hall ebbed, and all eyes swung to the entrance. A giant filled the doorway, cloaked, prodigiously tall, a mysterious runic sigil glowing on his chest, standing silent and watchful as he took in the assembled hall. The Fenrisians kept darting glances between the new giant and Limon Russ, instinctively measuring one against the other. In the end, they decided Russ came up short. The stranger at the door must have been 5 meters tall. Russ was only 4, and not as massively built. Russ, who had been reclining, sat up straight in his chair and stared back at the newcomer. Every feral instinct in him told him this was a presence not to be taken lightly. Doom watched as well. The man on the massive chair was almost a caricature of savagery, canine teeth bared, a mane of coarse hair bristling from his jowls, and eyes the tawny yellow of a predator, cold, keen, and dangerous. Yet beneath that untamed exterior, Doom felt a surprising steadiness, a calm intelligence, and a stubborn, singular will. Outsiders? The giant rumbled. Lemon Russ fixed him with an unwavering look, straightening without thought. Still, with a casual, almost defiant motion, he picked up a piece of roasted meat from the table and brought it to his mouth. We're strangers from afar, travelers passing through. All eyes swung to the tall man as a calm voice spoke, and then another figure stepped forward. Cloaked and lean, the newcomer was a brown-skinned, middle-aged man who seemed to court attention. Russ rubbed his chin, watching the self-styled traveler with a skeptical stare. He didn't look convinced. The middle-aged man raised his voice so it carried across the noisy hall. I don't agree that he's the greatest warrior, he declared, pointing first at the tall man and then at himself. And certainly not above me. You wouldn't even be able to beat me. The proclamation set the room off. A thunder of laughter rolled through the banquet hall as the Fenrisians guffawed at the supposed challenge, spray from their ale and the heat of strong liquor flecking their thick beards. Even the guards who had escorted the pair in drifted back to the edge of the room, uncertain. They'd been told the newcomers only wanted to rest their feet and warm up with some hot wine. Yet after a few words, the cloaked man was already looking for trouble. Russ laughed, a hollow sound that stretched out like a lone wolf howling at the moon. He found the man before him amusing. The first half of the stranger's claim might be true. The tall figure was undeniably dangerous, but the second half was brazenly presumptuous. If I defeat you, will you submit to me? The middle-aged man asked again, strangely confident. Doom's thick eyebrows drew together beneath his hood. The Emperor's manner of interaction was, if nothing else, entertaining. If striding in and demanding the host's submission counted as social grace, the Emperor was doing a bang-up job. All right, outsider. Russ ran both hands through his gold hair, smoothing it back, and studied the two newcomers. By Fenrisian custom, we settle this with 3 trials. He named them off: eating, drinking, and strength. Beat me at those, and I'll submit to you. His animal eyes, wild and predatory, locked onto the tall warrior who had not yet spoken. So? He asked. What do you say? All right. The Emperor tapped his own chest, then nodded toward Doom. I will take the eating and drinking contest, he said. He will match you in strength. No problem, outsider. Lemon Russ pushed back his chair and rose, eyes bright with fierce confidence. Russ accepts all challenges. Russ might not have been the most refined swordsman, but when it came to eating and drinking, no one on Fenris scared him. Doom, however, shook his head. In halting Fenrisian, he answered the Emperor's suggestion. I am not good at fighting. I will take the eating and drinking contest, and he gestured at Russ, will face you in strength. A ripple of derisive noise erupted from the long hall. Fenrisians began to bang on the tables and jeer, scoffing at a hulking figure who claimed to be all show and no substance. What did he mean? Not good at fighting? With that physique and that presence, he could intimidate a man to death. The Emperor glanced up and to the side at Doom, hood drawn low, and sighed. Doom had no intention of playing along. Not good at fighting, the Emperor muttered. Who in the universe could stand against him? Russ only grinned, flashing his wolfish teeth. No problem. I can accept that. Defeat the big man at feasting and the little man at strength. Victory was within reach. Bring on the ale, someone shouted. Russ let out a low growl to mark the official start of the trials. Doom pushed back his hood and took a seat at the long table opposite him, a mysterious smile playing on his lips as he looked forward to strong liquor and roasted meat. For a moment, Russ and the Fenrisians were taken aback by the sight of the big man's heroic features. The serving women in the banquet hall flushed, swayed their hips, and kept stealing coy, admiring glances. No one believed that such a powerful, handsome giant would honestly claim he wasn't good at fighting. They all shook their heads in amused disbelief. The Emperor sat off to the side, watching the eating and drinking duel in silence. Doom picked up a wine barrel that would have needed 2 Fenrisians to lift. In his hands it looked no larger than an oversized cup. He took a careful sip of the local Fenrisian ale. A scorching warmth ran down his throat, and his eyes brightened. He glanced at the burly man lugging another barrel, then looked back at Russ and said, This won't be enough. Russ surveyed the ever-growing mountain of wine stacked beside them, a flicker of surprise at the stranger's capacity crossing his face. The surprise quickly turned to delight. He had finally found a worthy adversary. Keep them coming, he roared. Empty the cellars. The Emperor, expression placid, raised knee brow almost imperceptibly. His dark eyes, too, had sharpened with interest. The liquor piled around them was so potent that a normal body would have trouble processing it without resorting to psychic power. Prepare, someone ordered. There were no more places left to stack barrels. Men were crowded tightly around the 2 giants. A warrior stepped into the center, smashed a drinking cup on the stone, and shouted, Start! On that cue, the 2 Primarchs launched into the contest. Doom tipped his head back, aligned throat and mouth, seized a barrel with both hands, and poured it straight down. His method was savage and direct. The lethal liquor gushed like a waterfall from his mouth, down his throat, and into his stomach. In the blink of an eye, a dozen empty barrels lay discarded at his feet. The Fenrisians stared, wide-eyed. Amazing, they cried, swept up by the display of raw, reckless abandon, cheering the outsider's brazen showmanship. Russ's eyes glowed red. He, too, grabbed barrels with both hands, tilting them into his mouth and drinking with savage gusto, all the while watching the outsider. Fierce, the crowd shouted, roars and whoops rising as the 2 extraordinary warriors downed liquor that seemed as hot as molten iron, setting their blood on fire. Bring me a vat, Russ bellowed when he saw himself falling behind. Fenrisian warriors hustled one up, and he leaned into it as attendants kept pouring. The Primarch's throat worked like a high-powered pump. A whirlpool formed on the surface of the wine as he drained it. Too strong, someone yelled, and a few onlookers pressed their hands to their faces, overwhelmed by the spectacle. White steam puffed from Russ's skin. his metabolism working overtime, forcing alcohol out through his pores in steaming bursts to keep his brain from succumbing to the drink. The crowd howled its approval, electrified by the ferocity before them. Doom glimpsed the scene out of the corner of his eye and knew he had to act. He needed to break the stalemate. Chapter 113. Father, Father, Father. Their contest wasn't about getting drunk. A Primarch's constitution made that impossible. It was a test of capacity. Who could consume the most strong liquor before the supply ran out? Doom, mid-chug, flicked a subtle, desperate signal with his eyes to the only ally he had in the arena, the Emperor. The Emperor read the cue instantly. He lifted a palm and an invisible force hauled the mountain-sized wine barrels into the air. With that phantom grip, he crushed them all. The liquor inside burst free in a roaring cascade. The Emperor wrapped the spilling liquid in a sheath of golden psychic power, and with a sweep of his hand, cleared away the ruined staves. A column of fire-colored spirits, sealed inside a shimmering bubble of foam, hovered steadily before Doom. Doom grinned, gave the Emperor a quick thumbs up, then plunged his head straight into the floating bubble. He inhaled like a kunpeng, swallowing the sea, a single brutal draw that pulled the potent liquor clean out of the psyker-charged foam. A spiraling vortex extended from his mouth as the wine vanished into him. The Fenrisians fell silent, eyes wide. The two great wolves were no less stunned. They lolled their tongues, rolled on the ground, and writhed as if struck to the core. Only the hall's two superhuman figures made any other sound, a pair of hoarse gulps like sea monsters taking in briny water. White vapor curled from their bodies as the expelled liquor condensed into a heavy mist. It crawled up to the dome, pooling into a thick cloud of intoxicating vapor that began to drizzle liquored rain. Mortals in the hall crumpled, overwhelmed by the fumes. The Emperor merely flicked a finger. A sweep of golden psychic light dispersed the alcohol, and those who had been felled were spared. Russ lifted his head from the wine vat. Seeing what the psyker had done, a new wariness sharpened in him. A wizard with that kind of power, that much raw, focused control, unquestionably had the right to stand and challenge him. I concede. Russ saw the ruined wine barrels scattered across the floor, far more of them destroyed than his own, and gave up without another word. He looked at the middle-aged man with a pained expression. "Give me back my wine," he pleaded. "The victor's been decided. Don't waste it." The Emperor inclined his head. With a single flick of his finger, the fallen barrels righted themselves, and the suspended liquor flowed precisely back into them as if nothing had happened. Doom licked his lips and met Russ's eyes. There was no gloating in his face, only calmness. "Shall we have an eating contest next?" he asked quietly, genuinely. Russ's regard for the large man climbed a few notches in that instant. Here was strength married to true magnanimity, a man with a broad heart. "Yes!" Russ answered eagerly, glad to face such an opponent out of respect and courtesy. "Somebody roast meat!" He bellowed the order, summoning the master grillers, and the two sides readied themselves for the next round of the contest. The great hall sprang to life. Shirtless warriors manned the grills, sweat beading on their skin as they tended searing coals and skewers, the air thick with the rich, mouth-watering scent of roasting beast meat. At Russ's insistence, the finest cuts, seared and seasoned by true masters, were brought out for their honored guests. Platter after platter arrived, skewers steaming and crusted with smoke, and Russ and Doom set to them like twin abysses, chewing without pause as if the supply could never be exhausted. A separate plate was set before the Emperor. He ate heartily, nodding his approval at the grilling. Both Primarchs were at the peak of their bodily powers, their metabolisms turning everything they consumed into fuel. Hard bone, metal skewers, charred crust, and clinging charcoal alike passed down without ill effect. Nothing lingered. Everything was consumed and made use of. As the informal contest continued, Russ and Doom exchanged a look of mutual respect, a private acknowledgement between gore, mans. Doom closed his eyes over a hot strip of meat as fat burst on his tongue, and a wave of simple, fierce satisfaction washed through him. He let the flavors unfurl, savoring the rich aroma released as the muscle fibers tore apart. Plates emptied in a steady, relentless tide. Bite after bite, everything went into mouths and down throats. Slowly, the differences in function between the two extraordinary beings became clear, and the moment of reckoning, the decision of the victor, drew ever nearer. Russ sat back with a heavy, satisfied groan. He'd reached the limit of what his body could hold. Doom, by contrast, was still at it, tearing into roasted meat with huge mouthfuls as if his stomach had no bottom. A hiccup escaped him between bites. Russ crushed a bone under his teeth, belched once, and raised a hand in surrender. "All right, you win." "You fought well," Doom said, shaking his head and giving Russ a thumbs up. "Russ admires you." "Mutual," Russ replied. Doom swallowed the last bite, let the flavor linger, gave a little salute to Russ, and hiccuped again. Then Russ looked to the Psyker Master across the cleared space and signaled the start of the final round. "Strength test, begin." "Give me a few seconds," the Psyker Master said. He rubbed his belly and twisted his waist a couple of times, working the food down so he could be ready to fight. The Fenrisians closed ranks around them. Compared to the eating and drinking, the combat was what everyone had really come for, the decisive event. If the middle-aged Psyker Master lost the fight, the results of the earlier contests would be meaningless. How could a man who could not hold his own in battle still expect obedience? Russ stepped out to the center of the banquet hall and raised his hand, signaling the middle-aged man opposite him. The final, most crucial round had begun. The Emperor, expression unreadable, walked onto the circular wrestling mat. His face was a still surface, calm as a silent sea, yet beneath it, a storm churned. Both men knew this could all be decided in an instant. Russ drew a deep breath. The best way to beat a wizard, he told himself, was to close the distance and strike hard before a spell could be spoken or a ritual enacted. There was no room for hesitation. He would go all in, pouring the full force of his body into a single, decisive assault. Doom, standing to one side, held up 2 wine cups like a referee about to give the signal. The 2 combatants glanced at him and nodded with solemn formality. The cups met with a sharp, clear clink. For the Fenrisians watching, the match was over the moment the sound rang out. A flash of golden light split the air, and before Russ could move, he was hurled backward across the mat. He hit the floor and lay there, unconscious. Their tribal king, the great wolf Russ, had been defeated in an instant. Only 3 people in the arena actually saw what happened. The whole thing unfolded in less than a heartbeat. At the signal, Russ exploded forward like a hunting wolf, closing the distance with lethal speed. He meant to finish it in a single blow. But as he lunged, he saw the supposed Psyker's figure swell, a golden gauntlet unfurled from the man's cloak. In an instant, the middle-aged guise fell away. The lean body ballooned into something vast and regal, a towering frame bathing the arena in a wash of living gold. A primitive recognition stirred in Russ then, something in his blood answering the presence. He hesitated for the barest fraction of a second, and that was all it took. The enormous golden fist met his face. Darkness burst at the edges of his vision and dragged him under. Half in shadow, half in shock, Russ understood everything with a clarity that belonged to dreams. The strange disturbances on Fenris days before, the outsiders in sealed armor watching his tribe from the dark, the visitors he had at first taken for invaders until they had vanished. Now the golden colossus towering over him was no enemy, but his birth father, come to take him home. Then he slipped fully unconscious. The Fenrisians had no chance to cheer. Stunned, they swarmed to his side, frantic to see whether their mighty son had been broken. Russ lay unconscious on the floor as 2 white-maned giant wolves sprang onto the banquet table. They crouched low, arched their backs, and bared their fangs, low snarls rumbling at the Emperor as if daring anyone to act. The Emperor, now back in his middle-aged guise, gave a calm, dismissive wave to the tense Fenrisians and the wolves. "No need to be nervous," he said. "He'll wake up soon, and then you'll know everything." He eased down beside Doom, took a sip from his wine, and began slicing roasted meat with a small knife. His casual composure and lack of hostile intent slowly melted the crowd's fear. The Fenrisians couldn't help noticing that these 2 men had just defeated Russ. Killing them would have been easy. That they hadn't, refusing to press an advantage, felt like a genuine sign of goodwill. Doom, however, was not interested in leaving Russ unconscious. "Get a bucket of ice water," he ordered the anxious onlookers. "Pour it on him. It works fast." The Emperor raised an eyebrow and cast a quick, private glance at Doom. This man carried a streak of severity. But when the situation called for it, drastic measures were justified. Reluctant but obedient, the Fenrisians hurried to fetch the water. They hauled a large bucket of ice water and dumped it over Russ with a sharp plop. The Primarch on the ground snapped to life, jolting upright from the shock. He opened his eyes in a burst of feral rage, his gaze sweeping the crowd with dangerous intensity before fixing on the figure who'd held the bucket. But he did not strike. Instead, to the stunned silence of the Fenrisians, Russ scrambled to his feet and strode straight to the Emperor. He dropped to one knee, lowered his proud head, and voice breaking with feeling, said, "Father, I will submit to you." The Emperor nodded, pleased. His form shifted into that vast figure of golden power armor they all revered, and the Fenrisians, seeing the divine aspect, bowed and knelt as well. "Rise, my son," the Emperor said, extending a gauntleted hand. He stroked Russ's hair and bent to help him up, voice gentle. "I have come to take you home." Chapter 114. Fenris explodes. 300,000 please vote. The father and son reunion ended with the Emperor's oddly cordial interaction. Russ understood immediately. The Emperor had come from Terra to fetch him. The time had come to leave Fenris and see Terra for himself. He gathered his wolf brothers and his chosen Fenrisian warriors and boarded the magnificent void ship that awaited them. In the splendor of the palace of the Emperor's dream, Doom sat on the steps, stroking Russ's wolf brothers, Frecky and Gary. The two white-maned giants were all muscle and bulk. Doom's tall figure made it almost casual to run a hand along their flanks as one might pet a hunting dog. The wolves accepted the attention, sprawled on the polished floor and emitting low, contented rumbles. Their ears never stopped twitching, catching the subtlest noises that threaded through the hall. By the throne, the Emperor and Russ spoke quietly. The Emperor spoke of origins and duty, explaining to his returning son who he was, the state of the Imperium of Man, and the urgent necessity of the Great Crusade. Russ sat in awe as the Emperor explained his destiny, the grand purpose of the Primarchs, and the legions, the gene sons fashioned from his own template. Doom could hear the conversation as well. For a Primarch, that distance meant nothing. He remained silent, stroking the massive wolves at his feet, neither interrupting nor offering counsel. From the Emperor's voice, Doom sensed urgency. He already knew there was more to the plan for the Great Crusade than the public line. A broader, surer design the Emperor believed could save all of humanity. The Emperor had confided as much to Doom in private. The Great Crusade was only the first step. He needed Doom's support to preserve the integrity of that plan, to prevent wasteful diversion of resources, and to concentrate effort where it mattered most. Still, Doom found himself wary. Could the Emperor's scheme be trusted? The four gods lurked in the shadows. They would never willingly relinquish humanity, and they would not make the Emperor's work easy. Doom stroked the wolf's head and felt a helplessness he could not disguise. Nur's strength, Doom admitted to himself, was currently no match for the rising Imperium. Both sides pursued the same ultimate goal, but they followed different paths. The Emperor's meaning had been plain: for now, follow his plan. If it failed, at least it might stabilize matters, or buy time. Then Doom would put his own plan into motion. Two people, two approaches, both could experiment, both could recover from mistakes, and neither would squander resources unnecessarily. Doom rose and crossed to the palace viewport, squinting into the churning depths of the warp. "Brother," a warm voice called from behind, and Russ slipped up to him with a sudden, theatrical roar. Doom turned. His brother wore that slightly ridiculous grin he always did, and Doom found himself returning a small smile despite everything. Russ noticed the hard line around Doom's eyes and the cold fire there and dropped the mockery. "Why so grim?" he asked, his tone softening. Doom let the question show what he could not hide. "I carry a monstrous blood feud," he admitted. "Am I to set it aside for the sake of the Great Crusade?" Russ did not answer at once. He came to stand beside Doom at the viewport and looked out at the warp's twisted, restless light, as if reading an answer in the eddies and storms. Outwardly boorish and crude, Lemon Russ nonetheless had a quiet sharpness to him, and he was thinking. Doom asked earnestly, "Are the enemies very powerful?" Russ had always assumed so. If his magnificent brother was strong, then the foes who opposed him had to be stronger still. Doom nodded toward the empty distance and answered plainly, "Very strong." "Then you must join the Great Crusade and finish what it began." Russ turned and looked up at his magnificent brother for a moment, then pointed back over his shoulder. "Carry out his plan. We, your brothers, will help you take your revenge." The word struck Doom in the chest. It was the most direct solution he had heard. Simple, unmistakable, the clearest path forward. "Thank you," he said softly. "We are bound by blood. Helping a brother avenge himself is only right." Russ stepped closer and put an arm around Doom's broad shoulders. After a beat, perhaps feeling the moment had grown too heavy, he changed the subject with the same dead serious tone. "I have one question," he said. "I lost at eating and drinking. Can I beat you in a fight?" "No." Doom's reply was grave and unhesitating, the confidence in his voice absolute. Russ let go of his brother's shoulders. "All right." Even though he'd half expected that answer, hearing it still left him unexpectedly deflated. Russ had gone off with his wolf brothers to keep an eye on the Fenrisian contingent, to make sure the planet's suns did not get too carried away on their first voyage between the stars. The Emperor's dream slipped out of the warp and came to rest at the system's warp anchor, the so-called Gate of Hades. Horus Lupercal had not left Terra. He waited there, eager for the return of another Primarch and keen to see how his brother carried himself. When the ship arrived, Horus's noble, gentle features fought to remain composed. The Emperor had thrown a banquet for the Fenrisians, but the guests, all rough men from a harsh world, behaved like barbarians, roaring and tumbling through the hall without regard for the setting or the strangers' disapproving stares. From an observation room on the banquet hall's second floor, behind a one-way panel, Horus watched with a vein standing out on his bald head. He had come full of expectation, picturing brotherly grace and the dignity of the Primarchs. Instead, he saw men urinating on Terra's soil inside the banquet chamber, a spectacle so crude and alien it shocked him. Then he looked at the Emperor, radiant, measured, impossibly serene. The contrast between that extraordinary king and these savage guests was immediate and brutal. The disparity gnawed at Horus until he could no longer bear it. "He's desecrating your radiance," Horus Lupercal snarled, glaring up at his father, the Emperor. A flea like him shouldn't even be on Terra. He could hardly bring himself to admit the urine-stained pillar in the banquet hall belonged to his brother. In Horus's mind, only someone stately and kingly, someone like himself, deserved the honor of being an emperor's son. That savage of a Primarch must be erased before he tarnished their father's light. The Emperor frowned. His voice was calm and low. Horus's reaction surprised him. It was more than displeasure. It was a hard, visceral revulsion. Suppressing his anger beneath a forced composure, Horus jabbed a finger toward Lemon Russ, who was still standing by the pillar, and spat out his contempt. "Look at him. Does he look like our brother? You and I are radiant and exalted, leaders Father forged to guide mankind. What is he?" "A decree of extermination should be issued for that planet called Fenris," Horus snapped. "Exterminatus?" The word hung in the hall like a damnation. To order the destruction of an entire world, Horus's voice trembled with the intensity of it. He was close to losing his temper. "You are wrong." "Horus Lupercal, keep your temper and think," Doom said evenly, his voice low and steady as he addressed the raging Primarch. "On ancient Terra, there's a proverb, a dragon has 9 sons, and each is different. Besides," he went on, "he was raised alone on a death world." Doom's gaze hardened. He fixed Horus with a look that cut to the bone and asked the most pointed question he could. "If you had been raised on Fenris, could you have stayed civilized?" He held Horus's eyes until the Primarch could no longer meet them. "Tell me, my blood brother, could you have remained civilized?" Doom emphasized blood on purpose, reminding Horus of their shared origin. The words, the calm authority, the ancient proverb, everything struck Horus like a heavy blow. He stood speechless, his chest tightening at the unspoken weight of the question. "Brother." "We are bound by blood. Show respect to every brother," Doom said, his voice softening as he laid a hand on Horus Lupercal's shoulder. "We have 20 brothers, and there will be many more of different kinds." Doom's tense features eased into a crooked, playful smile. "Heh heh, are you going to issue extermination decrees for all of them?" "Enough." The Emperor, who had been quiet until then, spoke at the right moment. You should spend some time alone with Russ. Doom fell in step with the Emperor as he rose to leave. He gave Horus a brief nod and an encouraging look before following. Horus watched them go. His anger ebbed. After a long sigh, he turned and walked down the corridor to find his brother. When he appeared, Russ immediately recognized the gentle, noble bearing that marked him as kin. Still, Russ detected a cold, barely concealed disdain in his brother's eyes. He couldn't help comparing the man standing before him to Doom, and the difference stung. "Brother, we need to talk alone," Russ said. Horus paused in the doorway and gestured him in. Russ gave a curt nod, soothed the Wolf brothers who lingered uncertainly at his side, then strode across the chamber to Horus. When the door shut and they were alone, something in him shifted. He shed the easy barbarity of his manner and spoke plainly, almost formally. "Lemon, Russ." For a moment Horus saw him anew. The shaggy furs were no longer crude accoutrements, but a noble mantle. The roughness fell away, and what remained was a ruler, sharp-eyed, measured, and sovereign. Horus answered in kind, Horus Lupercal. Only after they had exchanged names did Horus feel the full weight of how little he knew about this brother, about the man who looked, at first glance, like a barbarian, but who clearly carried more beneath the surface. A week after Russ returned, the Emperor called for Doom alone. Doom followed him down the palace's labyrinthine corridors to the private chambers, their footsteps muffled beneath banners and the watchful gaze of carved statuary. They spoke little. Instead, they let their eyes move across the sculptures lining the halls, the artisans' records of space marines and the honors they had earned. The Emperor's room was modest compared to the rest of the palace. Where the corridors glittered, his chamber held a plain bed, red silk drapes, a simple wooden bookshelf, and a few unadorned crafts. "Honor needs splendid embellishment to show its preciousness," the Emperor said. He must have seen the thought behind Doom's face, for in 2 calm sentences he explained the meaning of all that pomp. "Spending gold on decoration is perhaps the only thing I can do to commemorate the mortals who gave their lives in the Great Crusade." Doom nodded heavily. He agreed. Honor, he understood, was often a gilt frame around loss, a language of splendor that wraps death in meaning and persuades person after person to offer their lives for the aims of those in power. "What do you think of Russ's proposal? Join the Great Crusade and back my plan first." The Emperor stood at the table, his golden power armor pulsing with a faint internal energy, waiting for an answer. He didn't know Doom's stance on the Great Crusade. That warrior rarely volunteered an opinion. He watched events, judged them by his own code, and then fell silent. Men like him carried a complete set of values and their own rules for action. They could not be easily swayed. Convincing Doom to take part in the crusade and lend his immense strength to humanity's future would not be simple. Doom folded his arms, crossed to the window, and looked down over the palace rising beneath them. Like the building itself, the Emperor's plan was slowly coming into being. Doom couldn't bring himself to meet the urgent plea burning in the Emperor's eyes. He turned away and asked quietly, "What do you intend to do next?" The Emperor regarded Doom's tall back and answered in 2 words, "The Webway, humanity's salvation." Doom whirled around, eyes narrowing. "You know of the Webway?" The surprise on the Emperor's face told Doom he had detected astonishment, not ignorance, in the question. "I do," the Emperor said. Doom inclined his head slightly. "I've heard rumors and have some understanding of it." He had known of the Webway for a long time, an almost mythic construct of the old ones that threaded through the galaxy, linking distant worlds. It was a separate, high-speed network for travel, neither real space nor the warp, combining the safety and stability of the physical universe with the speed and efficiency of the warp. In many ways, it was its own vast domain. The last of the old ones, Life-Forger Primal, had once spoken of it to him. "It is a construct of an ancient, intelligent species," the Emperor said, "now under the control of the Ida spirit race." "Yes." Doom's answer was measured. The Emperor did not ask how Doom knew of the Webway. Instead, he let a trace of excitement creep into his usually unruffled voice as he explained his design. "I intend to penetrate the Webway, transfer all of humanity into it, cut our dependence on the warp entirely, and thus take mankind out of the sight of the 4 gods." He walked to a wall and swept aside a heavy red curtain. The surface behind it was obsidian, polished to a depthless black. Etched and painted across it was his future in a web of lines and numbers, so dense and precise that a mortal mind would struggle to follow it. Doom stood beneath the mural and looked up. The image unfolded like a map, Primarchs and Space Marine legions traced in vector and code, the Great Crusade marked in phases and timelines, the webway plan sketched as arteries and gates. Routes of migration, contingencies for escaping the warp, the means by which humanity would vanish from the awareness of the four gods, all were set down in cold, intricate detail. Every prima, RCH had a page of purpose. The duties of each legion were annotated, the timing and expected impact of the crusade were laid out. The mechanics of how the webway would be accessed, reworked, and used to ferry entire worlds were diagrammed with clinical clarity. It was not a dream so much as an engineering problem solved on stone. Doom stood very still, taking it in, the scale, the audacity, and the single, inevitable goal at the center of it all, a future in which mankind lived beyond the reach of gods. Line by line, the Emperor drew by hand, painting in gold across the black obsidian, dreams and futures mapped in living script. Doom ran his fingers over the mural, following the lines and numbers, trying to feel how real the Emperor's design was. "Do you think it will succeed?" Doom asked. The question was almost unnecessary, even a little blunt. Asking the author of an elaborate scheme whether he believed in it was like asking an architect how confident he was that an unfinished skyscraper would stand. The comparison wasn't perfect, but it fit the moment. The Emperor did not answer right away. He paused, considering, drawing on tens of thousands of years of gathered counsel and experience. If Malkador or Valdor had posed the same query, he would have offered simple assurance. He would have told them he was confident. They were his confidants and lieutenants within the Imperium. Part of his duty to them was to supply certainty so they could act. Doom was not one of them. He stood outside the Imperium, and the Emperor was here to ask a favor, potent aid from beyond his own domain. That difference made the question harder to answer. With your help, the success rate can be raised by at least 30%. After a long moment of thought, the Emperor answered carefully, speaking without exaggeration or deceit after running the numbers in his head. It was only 50% before. With you, it's 80. Doom tore his gaze away from the mural and fixed the Emperor with a look that said he wasn't easily fooled. 50%, plain and simple, meant an equal chance of winning or losing. "You said humanity only has one chance for revival?" Doom asked. He didn't linger on the thought. Then, after a breath, he added, "If you fail, do I still have a chance?" The Emperor did not dodge the question. Humanity truly does have only one chance. He nodded once, then pointed first at himself and then at Doom. "I have one chance. You have one chance." Doom's look was unrateable, as if silently demanding seriousness. The Emperor met it without a flinch. "I'm stating a fact. Before I met you, I believed humanity really did have only one opportunity, and that I had to take it." His voice hardened with memory. "Your return gives us another opening. It lets me be bolder, to take greater risks to bring my plan to fruition." As he spoke, he swept his hand into a nearby bowl and scooped out a handful of gold dust. At the far end of the obsidian wall he had been working on, he resumed his artwork, letting the dust sift through his fingers. "First, finish my plan," he said, steady and fervent. "Then you and I will join forces. Bring your brothers. Once humanity's situation is stabilized, we will together challenge the four gods." The gold dust traced his words in shining filaments, sketches of futures unfurling across the black stone. With every sentence, the new image, an extension of his grand design, took shape on the wall. A ring of enormous, radiant figures marched forward, shepherding space marines out of the webway and straight into the warp. One voice, cold, certain, spoke over the light. "The four gods are neither blind nor deaf. They will use everything at their disposal to stop you." Doom's face remained calm. The Emperor's sweeping vision didn't inflame him, it sharpened him. "Maybe they've already set this up as an illusion," he said. He plucked a pinch of gold dust and tossed it casually onto a slab of black obsidian. The powder scattered, and when it settled, an ugly 8-pointed star lay revealed, the mark of chaos. Its malignant tendrils pointed to every critical node of the Emperor's design. Primarchs turned by chaos, space marines turned against one another, a ruined webway project, and the failure of the planned species migration. Doom's small, deliberate gesture had stripped the Emperor's plan bare and showed it smashed. At the center of that chaos star, a captive figure glowed, the Emperor himself, bound and tormented within chaos's embrace, betrayed and imprisoned by the very species he sought to save. "That is why I need you," Doom said. The Emperor found he could not dismiss the future Doom had shown him. On the mural, a man advanced, tossing handfuls of gold dust. As the particles drifted and scattered, a warrior rose up, brandishing a god-slaying sword that threw off a fierce light. He stood, unbowed and immovable, against the grotesque forms of the four gods. Behind him, people gathered slowly, those who still dared to hope. From that frozen scene, a voice seemed to come. "You get one chance, I get one chance." The Emperor straightened, bringing them back to the point. "You must help me seize this opportunity." There were no orders in his tone, only a plea. The expectation in his eyes, as hot and insistent as sunlight, seared Doom. "If I fail," the Emperor said, "I will do everything I can to stabilize the situation and make your chance possible." He spoke with such naked sincerity and extended his hand toward Doom, filled with a hopeful, almost desperate earnestness. Doom kept his arms crossed and studied the vast mural, his voice low and skeptical. He wondered why the Emperor singled him out, why he seemed different from everyone else. "Why are you so certain? So certain that I can seize the opportunity again?" "I am certain." The Emperor did not lower his hand. The Emperor spoke earnestly to Doom, his calm, steady voice full of trust. "You are the destroyer warrior, the unyielding god-slayer. If I fail, I have no doubt you will rise again." Doom regarded the Emperor's outstretched hand, then looked into eyes that shone with an unmistakable certainty. At last he reached out and clasped the hand. "First, carry out your plan. Complete the Great Crusade." Chapter 116, The Glorious Great Crusade. Two large hands closed over one another. After long, careful deliberation, Doom finally agreed to join the Imperium's Great Crusade. They had a common enemy, the Chaos Gods, and in the face of that threat, the two powers would unite and resist. Doom's decision to bring the Norworlds into the fold was, in effect, his recognition of the Imperium of Man. It made their relationship one of equals. He endorsed the Emperor's plan and pledged to help shape it, to refine whatever was necessary to save humanity. Nothing about their partnership changed in nature. Their cooperation remained of mutual respect and parity. Doom's participation did not mean subordination to the Imperium's Council of War. The Emperor granted him a broad measure of autonomy. When the agreement was sealed, the Emperor's composure shifted. There was a flicker of emotion in his voice as he stepped forward with a small rectangular box. "I have a gift for you," he said. Doom did not take it. He asked instead what was inside. The Emperor had already given him a great many things, an alliance, trust, freedom, and Doom needed time to consider this new gesture. Acceptance was not automatic. Even in celebration, he weighed obligations and consequences before he could commit. Doom mulled over his relationship with his brothers, trying to read the Emperor's intent. An old Terra proverb came to mind. To eat with someone is to owe them. To accept their gifts is to be bound to them. He tried not to let it complicate things. "Don't overthink it," the Emperor said, sensing Doom's hesitation. He opened a small black carved box to reveal something resting on a bed of red silk. Doom's eyes widened. A rush of excitement washed over him, like the shock of seeing an old friend after years apart. "Do you like it?" the Emperor asked, and without waiting for an answer, he handed the box to Doom. "It was made especially for you. I went to some trouble." Doom lifted the object out and stroked it, feeling its weight and texture. He didn't refuse the Emperor's kindness. He treasured the gift. "I like it very much," he said. Cradled in his hands was an ancient double-barreled shotgun, clearly tailored to him. It was a deliberate throwback to a primitive age. Matchlock mechanisms flanked the heavy barrels, a wooden foregrip sat beneath the stock, and the body and pistol grip were forged from dark, patterned Woot steel. It was simple and brutal, and exactly the sort of thing Doom loved. The two barrels were enormous, each chamber as thick as a Space Marine's arm, joined together in a brutal, uncompromising union. Ancient runes were etched into the rough steel, lending the weapon an air of age and mystery. Doom held it in his left hand and couldn't stop turning it over, fascinated. "Grip it tight. Inject your fury," the Emperor ordered, explaining the shotgun's extraordinary nature. Doom closed his fingers around the stock and pushed his will into the gun, his indomitable spirit, a searing, endless rage. The runes along the body of the weapon flared faintly as sparks cracked across the metal, the whole piece seeming to burn with a living, unquenchable fury. "The super shotgun, that's what I call it," the Emperor said, clearly proud of the match between weapon and wielder. "It feeds on your fury. Your rage is its ammunition. In practice, that means limitless power. Look at its chambers," he added like a craftsman unveiling his masterpiece, drawing Doom's attention to the twin bores. Doom's finger settled on the trigger. Ready. Doom spun the shotgun in a graceful flourish, then gave it a sharp flick. The weapon broke open at the handle, exposing two cavernous, large-caliber chambers. His eyes gleamed as two golden bullets blinked into existence and slid neatly into place. "Bullets personally inscribed with runes by me," the Emperor said, pride thinly buried in his voice as Doom watched. "They serve as physical ammunition for firing from another dimension. The power they release is immense." "How many?" Doom asked, one hand already working the tie-in with a familiarity born of long habit. The Emperor only smiled, half coy. "As many as you want." Doom closed the barrels with practiced ease, hung the shotgun on his belt, and allowed a rare, bright smile to cross his face. The Emperor, noting the impatience in him, offered gently, "Want to test its power? Is there a firing range nearby?" Doom's answer was plain in the hard set of his jaw and the way his fingers tightened around the weapon. Of course he wanted to test it. The conqueror in him stirred at the thought, eager to see just how much devastation those rune-forged rounds could unleash. "No firing range." The Emperor shook his head slowly, a faint, inscrutable smile on his lips. From within his robe he produced a small hollow projector. "This will be more suitable for you." Doom narrowed his eyes as he looked at that half-smile, and an odd heat ran through the weapon in his hand as if it had been placed in a forge. An old Terra proverb came back to him: "Eat at another's table, and you are in their debt. Take from another, and you are bound to them." The feeling in his hand reinforced the truth of those words. The projector bloomed, casting a holographic image into the room. A gigantic lizard filled the light, scales humming with raw psychic energy, claws raking the air. Doom blinked. "Psychic sand lizard?" "The Xenos hold 13 star systems," the Emperor said. "They claim those systems as their birthright and are expanding outward fast." "How many troops will I have?" Doom asked. "My legion is still recruiting and training. Russ and his legion will accompany you," the Emperor replied. "The warhounds of the 12th Legion will answer your command. They are our finest assault troops." Doom considered the projection, the heat in his grip, and then inclined his head. "All right. 2 Primarchs in theater, 2 Astartes legions and their attached mortal auxiliaries. It was an unprecedented concentration of force." Doom added, "I also need transfers from the 4th, 7th, and 15th legions." As the stream of incoming intelligence scrolled across the viewport, Doom's heavy brows drew together. He now understood why the Emperor had dispatched 2 legions and a Primarch to the sector. The creature, the so-called psychic sand lizard, was far from an ordinary Xenos threat. The Emperor listened to Doom's request but did not answer at once. Instead he crossed to the desk, set quill to parchment, and wrote with quick, sure strokes. When he was done, he impressed his personal seal into the wax. "Tomorrow," he said, "this order will be proclaimed throughout the Imperium of Man." Doom took the document, reading it with a flicker of surprise. After a moment's consideration, he accepted it. The paper conferred an extraordinary mandate, military conscription authority, permitting Doom to requisition any Imperial unit to support his operations. Such a sweeping power would almost certainly spark outcry in the ranks, but Doom accepted without hesitation. The 21st Legion was still critically undermanned, and the training of the Nor combat personnel had only just begun. As a skeleton commander charged with a vast and dangerous campaign, he needed every available asset brought to bear. Doom looked the Emperor in the eye, then turned and strode from the chamber toward the 6th Legion's garrison to confer with Russ about the battle plan. As Doom left, the Emperor found himself raising his right hand and clenching it into a tight fist, a small, private gesture of encouragement. He had won a powerful ally. With Doom at his side, he could push his designs more boldly. The Webway project could be moved up the agenda. The Great Crusade would be only the cover, pleasant and useful, but not the true aim. Doom's future duty, the Emperor thought, was to stand as guardian over the Webway. He hummed an unnamed tune as he did the calculations in his head, standing before the polished obsidian wall and going over every detail of the plan. Doom walked through the garrison. Space Marines who caught sight of the Primarch fell to one knee in deference to the Gene Father's kin. At the 6th Assembly platform, Leman Russ was speaking to the Gene sons who had remained on Terra. Doom paused in the shadowed edge of the crowd and waited for Russ to finish. Russ himself had changed. The savage edge that once defined him seemed tempered. He wore the bearing of a ruler now, not a berserker. From the platform he spoke with the fierce intelligence of a wise king, his passion steady and deliberate as he addressed his legion. As the Primarch's speech reached its climax and faded away, Doom appeared at the perfect moment, striding toward Russ. A flicker of pleased surprise crossed Russ's bestial eyes, but beneath it was understanding. He knew precisely why Doom had come. Russ had taken a good liking to Doom and wanted to deepen their acquaintance. Both of them had returned to the Imperium in quick succession. It made sense, Russ felt, that they should learn from one another about how best to organize their legions. Russ had already begun reshaping his own. He had divided his legion into 13 great companies, each modeled on an aspect of Fenrisian culture, intending to anchor the legion to its homeworld. He had even given his 6th legion a fiercer name, Space Wolves. Before Russ could speak, 2 of his wolf brothers bounded forward with a whoosh, racing straight toward Doom. "Great Primarch!" they shouted. The Space Wolves fell to one knee as a unit, honoring the arrival of the Gene Father's brother. Doom only half acknowledged them with a calm, powerful voice. "Rise." He reached out and stroked the head of a towering wolf at his side, the simple gesture carrying across the ranks to every Space Marine present. "Brother!" Russ called, and the 2 Primarchs embraced warmly. "You know why I'm here. It's time for us to set out." Doom wasted no preamble. He said it plainly to Russ. "The Space Wolves are waiting for the hunt." A feral light ignited in Russ's eyes. His face hardened into a grim snarl, fangs flashing. "To tear the Xenos apart with my brother," he growled. Doom produced a holo projector and laid out the Emperor's orders. The 12th Legion was mustering in the eastern end starward sector, he explained. They were to join that assembly. Tomorrow, astropathic relays will broadcast the operation to every participating fleet, Doom added. This is a major coordinated strike. We must leave now, he continued. We need to rendezvous with them before the other legions finish mustering in the fleet. Russ's expression went as serious as Doom's. This would be his first battle since returning to the Space Wolves, and the Imperium's first large-scale operation to involve 2 Primarchs in the field. "Very well," he said. "Doom, come aboard my Gloriana Queen-class flagship. We will sail together to the rendezvous." Russ offered the invitation with all the straightforward sincerity of a wolf brother, and the night air seemed to carry the promise of battle. "I don't see the chapter text. You only pasted the author note. Please paste the full chapter you want rewritten, or attach it in pieces if it's long. While you prepare that, a couple quick questions to make sure I match your intent. Preferred dialect, US or UK English? Preserve original tone exactly, literal, or smooth and naturalize more freely. Any phrases, names, or terminology you want kept unchanged? Are there any content sensitivities I should be aware of? Explicit scenes, spoilers to avoid? If you want, I can also show a quick polished version of the 2 lines you already sent. My head's a bit muddled today. Thanks, too, for the donations and everyone's monthly votes. Paste the chapter when ready, and I'll rewrite it into clear, idiomatic English. Chapter 117, Raffenkel. Oh? Doom raised an eyebrow, a glint in his eye. Is she ready? Gloriana-class battleships were the pinnacle of Imperial shipbuilding, mass-produced in name only. Each hull was unique, assembled on Mars and other forge worlds with an extraordinary amount of handwork. Master artisans and red-robed tech priests labored over them until every vessel became a singular masterpiece. When Russ returned, the Emperor had given him a Gloriana to serve as his flagship. The Emperor had granted Doom one as well. Doom's ship had been riding alongside the Void Wanderer toward the Norworlds to receive further modifications and upgrades. Thanks to the Legion, and not those eccentric red-robed ones, Russ added with a proud puff of his chest, making it clear he credited his sons above the Mechanicum. She was finished not long ago. She's waiting for us. Russ pointed toward the void. Doom followed his gesture and saw, docked in the Lionsgate spaceport, a vast warship the size of a small moon. Even at that distance, a Primarch's eye could pick out the painted wolf's head on her aft quarter plating, a bold sigil that marked the vessel as Russ's. The Raffenkel, Russ said, hands on his hips, staring up at the Gloriana-class battleship. From Fenrisian legend, the name of a great king. Doom nodded. A fitting, glorious name. He glanced at the hull. Though Gloriana-class ships were produced in numbers, each was unique, born noble, pledged to one of the Imperium's mightiest Primarchs, and deserving of names pulled from myth and history. Come aboard, brother. She might have something to show you. Russ's weathered face split into a secretive smile as he gestured toward the gangway. He had a surprise in store for his brother. Doom, impatient by nature, didn't wait for ceremony. He took Russ by the arm and, with more force than affection, pulled him toward the spaceport. Russ wasn't expecting such enthusiasm. Surprised, he spun and bellowed to the warband behind him. Board the ship, assemble! The space wolves exchanged amused looks as their Genefather was literally shepherded along by his brother. Above them, the proud name gleamed on the prow, the Hrafenkel. By combat order, the ship had been readied for battle. During the last tense calibrations, the Emperor's two sons, Doom and Russ, stepped aboard the battleship. They walked the corridors reserved for Primarchs, and every serf, mortal crewman, and space marine they passed fell to their knees, paying homage to the two great leaders. Even by warship standards, the Gloriana Queen was lavish. Its passageways and cabins were broader, its accommodations far superior. Doom, in his quieter moments, had inspected returning vessels and seen how wretched life could be for ordinary people aboard most ships, families packed into tiny compartments, cramped and constantly jostling for every scarce convenience. He had watched tempers flare over something as trivial yet vital as a single valve or power switch. Russ noticed the look of pity in his brother's eyes as he regarded the kneeling crew. "This place is nothing like the realm you govern," he said perceptively. "Machines make life easier, but the Imperium cannot survive another rebellion." Russ had wisdom beyond his years. The Emperor had told him of Doom's origins. He knew the world Doom ruled was an enlightened, progressive utopia, and he understood why his brother's compassion burned so strongly. Humans and machines lived together in harmony there. Under his rule, people no longer went hungry, and material want had ceased to be the driving force of life. Strength came from a fierce martial spirit. Honor was revered, right and wrong were plain, and the place had become a crucible for mighty warriors. Russ admired his brother's largeness of mind. Doom could accept machines without qualm, and yet encompass the Imperium in his vision. Russ believed Doom to be both a man of force and a man of wisdom, powerful in body, but occupying a loftier spiritual plane as well. He could personally found the Norworlds, creating a bright, hopeful realm, and at the same time tolerate the darkness and filth of the Imperium. He never put on a show of pity for the mortals. Doom understood that true compassion was not cheap sympathy for an individual or a world, but the work of dragging humanity out of the quagmire of war. Because of that, Russ had always held Doom in higher esteem than Horus. Both were Primarchs and both could lead, but to Russ Doom's abilities far outshone those of the bald-headed brute who was so much a daddy's boy. At least, that's what Russ thought. "I know," Doom said with a wry smile, walking alongside Russ toward what he liked to call the Palace of Surprises. His gaze skimmed over the serfs and the ordinary folk, and he understood exactly what Russ was getting at. The Emperor could easily have demanded that Doom's realm be folded into the Imperium and then granted nominal autonomy. Instead, he treated the Norworlds as equals to the Imperium. The intent was obvious: to isolate Nur and the Imperium from one another so both could evolve on their own terms. Nur was small enough to accommodate intelligent machines. The Imperium was vast and had no tolerance for artificial minds. Granting Nur independence was both a concession to Doom and a safeguard for the surviving machines. It gave sentient machines a clear refuge and kept them out of the Adeptus Mechanicus's reach, reducing the chance of another full-scale machine rebellion. Even if Nur's territory grew tenfold, it would still be no match for the Imperium should machines ever rise in earnest. And as for the Adeptus Mechanicus and the Imperium's strict ban on artificial intelligence, the Nor worlds were the ones researching and sheltering those machines. What business was that of the Imperium's? The Adeptus Mechanicus shouldn't come to the Imperium to preach. Send them to the Nor worlds. There our relations are those of equals, one of them quipped as the two Primarchs walked, trading low jokes to ease the weight of the occasion. This is it. Russ set his vast hands on the adamantium doors and, with a shove born of brute strength, began to part them. Doom watched with barely concealed excitement, eager to see the surprise his brother had promised. As the doors opened, the sight inside stole Doom's breath. It was utterly extraordinary, like stepping into a feast hall on Fenris, only on a far grander scale. The floor was covered with layered pelts and fur rugs. The dome overhead had been inlaid with the spine and ribs of some colossal beast. The palace walls were carved with runes and scenes of Fenrisian life. Braziers burned with animal fat oil, casting a dim, warm glow that softened the room and filled it with the smoky scent of hide and ember. The whole place felt intensely Fenrisian. "It's excellent," Doom said, admiration in his voice. "Far more fitting than cold steel." At that, the assembled Fenrisians surged forward with reverent fervor and dropped to their knees. "My lord, you've arrived," they called, offering the utmost of respect. "No need for formalities," Doom said, sinking down onto the fur rug and letting himself relax. Around him the Fenrisians fussed with their braids and heavy wool cloaks. Their thick hair was tightly plaited in the old style. He smiled at them. "Are you getting used to Terra's climate?" "It's boiling," one of them grumbled, settling down beside him with an exaggerated sigh. "I almost want to shave my head. And those people, always telling us to follow 100 rules. It's infuriating." Russ sat cross-legged opposite them and called over a pair of Fenrisian aides. "Bring mead," he rumbled. He wanted to drink and talk, not posture. He discarded whatever disguise he'd been wearing. The ruse fell away, and his eyes were abrupt and keen. A huge hand tapped the table in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. Doom's face lost its easy expression. He understood how dangerous this fight could be. "They're psychic," he said quietly, and set the projection device on the table. The hollow bloomed and began to play, reconnaissance feeds and intelligence on the Sandel, Ezard scrolling in steady clinical detail across the surface. The aliens were physically formidable, thick, armor-like scales that could shrug off bolter rounds. But that wasn't the main concern. "Psychic power is the key," Doom said, placing his hand on the projection to bring up the most important detail. His face hardened, disgust creased the corners of his eyes. "Eerie, supernatural abilities." "Witchcraft," Russ echoed, his voice full of the same contempt. He started to say, "Witches are a bunch of charlatans," then cut himself off, remembering his father's golden radiance and softening the word, "mysterious beings." Russ let out a long, frustrated breath, almost cursing himself. He did not use psychic powers, but he had a strong psychic aptitude and could manage a few simple, minor spells. Doom nodded. No one understood the peril of psychic talent better than he did. Masters who dabbled in the warp almost always found chaos waiting to consume them. Doom had seen only one person wield psychic power without corruption, the Emperor. They fell silent and watched the projection continue to play, the recorded intelligence on the sand lizards scrolling across the light between them. The longer the two Primarchs watched, the deeper the furrows grew in their brows. The creatures the Imperial Vanguard had nicknamed psychic sand lizards were proving to be more than a nuisance. Their species showed a strict division of labor and an unnervingly efficient social organization. The warrior caste towered nearly 3 meters tall, their overlapping scales forming an almost impenetrable armor. Those scales reflected energy and created a resonant field that let the lizards move through earth and sand as if they were swimming. They could literally glide beneath the ground and erupt where they chose. Their weapons, barbed, crystalline blades and chitinous lances, sliced through Space Marine ceramite as if it were cloth, and individual members of the cast possessed strength that outmatched a Space Marine by a worrying margin. Using their resonance and burrowing ability, they were easily able to tunnel through mankind's defensive works and appear inside fortifications where no human should have been able to follow. Chapter 118. Legion Assembly. The sand lizards were terrifying in more ways than their claws could account for. Their warriors wielded psychic powers that not only amplified their physical strength, but also conjured phantasms so vivid and horrific that mortal soldiers often froze in terror, their combat effectiveness shattered. Among them, high-ranking shamans could channel those psychic forces with calm precision, casting a variety of debilitating spells on the battlefield. The 5th Legion's intelligence report was blunt. The psychic sand lizards had enormous war potential. More than 1 million fully grown warriors, hundreds of millions of lower-tier conscripts, and a vast number of shamanic sorcerers made up their ranks. They controlled 18 densely populated star systems, and their sphere of influence stretched some 50 light-years. The only thing restraining their expansion was their primitive navigation technology. They still relied on reverse engineering leftover human interstellar systems for faster-than-light travel. "How do we fight them?" Russ asked, licking his fangs as he turned to his brother. Even without formal military schooling, he had a soldier's instincts. He could read a battlefield and plan an engagement by feel. Now he looked to Doom, the king who had undergone systematic military training, to see if he would offer a strategy. "You fight your way, I'll fight mine." Doom stated his plan without hesitation. "Find their core world. I will take the warhounds to the heart of it and force the aliens to pull their main forces back to defend it." Russ nodded. "I'll hunt the periphery, drive them to contract their defenses, use the Imperial fleet's mobility to cut off reinforcements and settle the fight in space." "So be it." Russ thumped his chest in agreement. He understood the true aim behind Doom's words: to buy time for the tens of billions of humans enslaved across a dozen star systems. If Doom could lure the enemy's main strength inward, the wolves would be free to pick apart the poorly defended outer worlds. The Imperial fleet would intercept and destroy the reinforcing armadas in the void. With the living enemy broken and scattered, they could then strike at the alien throne world and, when the moment came, wipe the species from existence. "I'm counting on you," Doom said earnestly. He would plunge into the alien core and hold a long, brutal line of engagement. The decisive element behind that gambit would be Russ's Space Wolves, the blade that would annihilate any reinforcements and make Doom's sacrifice worth the cost. "I will be your most reliable support." Russ felt the weight of the promise settle on his shoulders. His brother had entrusted everything to him. "To victory." He raised his goblet. The Fenrisians poured the mead, and Doom and Russ drank, sealing the final details of the battle. Around them, the Gloriana-class battleship trembled as its warp engines spooled up. The Raffenkel slipped free of the Sol system and set course for the Eastern End star territory, where alien hostilities had flared into open war. At the rendezvous in the Eastern End, the 12th Legion was already assembling. Squadrons and battle groups converged until a formidable strike force stood ready to hit the Xenos with everything they had. "Karn, look!" the 12th Legion's current Legion Master shouted. Through the viewport of the Gloriana Queen, he and his officers watched Imperial ships tear through the warp veil, pouring into real space like an iron torrent. Legion Master Locke only shook his head and sighed. The scale of the response was staggering. The Imperium had summoned the Warhounds and detachments from the 4th, 7th, and 15th Legions, all to fall under the command of a great Primarch. All the fleets and warriors of the 6th Legion were arriving continuously to greet their Primarch. 2 main legions stood ready, each under a Primarch's command. It was a rare honor for several Space Marine legions to be sent to support those 2 leaders in battle, and an extraordinary sign of trust that the Emperor had allowed the Warhounds, the Legion's bravest assault companies, to take part in so glorious a campaign. Captain Karn of the 8th Assault Company watched the unfading glow of the warp and felt a deep surge of emotion. "The scale of this war far exceeds our imagination," he said. Since the start of the Great Crusade, Karn had never seen a fleet this large, well over 100,000 space marines assembled together. He welcomed the prospect of glory and conquest, but he also feared the cost. The Warhounds were specialists in close assault. Their losses, he knew, would be brutal. Worse still, the Legion was no longer commanded by their own Gene-Father, but by another Primarch. Karn did not fear death. No warrior worth the name feared it, but he worried about how his Legion would be used. It felt like watching two opponents fight while the Warhounds were wielded as the instrument in a Primarch's hand. Will he use skill to kill his enemy, or brute force that chips a blade? Karn asked bluntly. He didn't hide his worry. Across from him sat Legion Master Locke, the man who loved the Legion more fiercely than anyone, and Karn wanted to know what would become of it. Locke only shook his head. For the first time in a long while, bewilderment touched him. The Legion's fate was no longer theirs to shape. It rested in the hands of a Primarch. The two battle-hardened men fell into a quiet that was almost new. Outside the viewport, a river of stars flowed by, and reinforcements continued to arrive in a slow, steady tide. They watched the fleets assemble and thought about the future neither of them could command. "What kind of man is the Primarch of the 21st Legion?" Karn asked suddenly. His voice, honed by war, carried a curious, searching clarity. "I don't know," Locke said again, and this time his uncertainty was absolute. Locke had too many unanswered questions that day. Rumors from Terra rode the astropathic network like a fever, and each new message contradicted the last. "I heard from brothers on Terra that the Emperor himself has prepared an unprecedented ceremony to welcome his return," one of those voices said, and the words hung in the cold air between them. Karn's eyes lit with anticipation. He nodded so fast his helmet creaked. "Then he must be an extraordinary being," he said. "Perhaps our Gene-Father will be received just as warmly when he comes home." Locke smiled and turned his gaze out into the void. He felt the same restless hope that made the whole fleet hum. For all the uncertainty, there was a promise in those rumors that steadied him. "They've arrived." The Legion Master's voice was quiet, but an odd sharpness cut through it when he spoke. Something in the empty dark had disturbed him. He pointed, and where Locke had only expected distant lights, a ragged tier of blackness opened in the stars. The 15th Legion. They had all known, in a way, which contingents the astropathic channels were calling. But seeing them with his own eyes made Locke's pulse quicken. The 15th Legion traveled in a pattern that drew eyes and suspicion in equal measure. Small in number, cloaked in secrecy, their heraldry rarely seen. Rumors clung to them like shadow, that their gene seed was unstable, that the imperfection birthed strange flesh mutations among their ranks. Those whisperings had long kept many of the other legions at a wary remove. Time slid by. Fleets slipped past one another, docking and undocking, banners drifting in the void like motes in an unseen wind. Slowly the gatherings thinned. Ships departed for rendezvous points or took up orbital stations. The system's feverish bustle ebbed, and the starry expanse returned at last to a deceptive calm. The main body of the fleet hung like a storm front in the void, packed so tightly that it filled the entire star system. The Space Marines waiting within it were anything but calm. If anything, their anticipation tightened with every passing moment. When the warp rift tore open, and a Gloriana-class battle barge reappeared in Rhea, L-space, a roar went through the comms. The sight of that great hull announced more than a ship. Two Primarchs, two of the Emperor's sons, had returned to the starry sky. "Hail, great Primarchs," came the cry, and then a flood of voices, warriors and captains in tones equal parts reverence and relief, poured into the channels. 12th Legion flagship, prepare to receive the Primarchs. There was no reply from the Primarchs themselves. They accepted the mortal's homage without acknowledgement. Their very presence spoke as authority. As the teleportation lights snapped alive and the warded doorway shimmered, every figure on the bridge of the Warhound's flagship, the Gloriana Queen, went to a knee. "Rise." The voice that issued from the shimmering air was steady and deep, gentle in cadence but full of an innate power, and none dared disobey. When the warriors rose and looked up, they saw the Primarchs for the first time. Vast, terrible, and magnificent, their bearing enough to make even battle-hardened veterans feel small. The Emperor's son filled the throne like a living statue of strength. Broad-shouldered and heroic, he sat with the authority of a king. He wore a simple leather kilt at his waist and battle boots on his feet. His thighs and torso were bare beneath gleaming shoulder pauldrons that were secured to his belt with crossed leather straps. A red cloak hung from his shoulders. At the sight of him, some among the assembly dropped to their knees again, as if afraid to profane the Primarch's presence. 30 warriors of the 21st Legion flanked him, 2 ranks deep, silent sentinels guarding the throne. From his high seat, Doom surveyed the crowd like a ruler taking measure of his subjects. "Report," he called, his voice low but carrying across the hall. He wanted to know whether the forces he had summoned had arrived. One by one, the Legion representatives stepped forward and saluted. 4th Legion, Phrixus salutes the Primarch. 2,000 Legion warriors stand ready for your command. 7th Legion, Appius salutes the Primarch. 2,000 Legion warriors ready. 15th Legion, Ahriman salutes the Primarch. 100 Legion warriors present. Warhounds Legion, Locke salutes the Primarch. The Warhounds await your orders. Doom inclined his head once, a single motion. His gaze swept over the cluster of commanders and the numbers they had brought, weighing them like a strategist already plotting the next move. The warriors stood proud, chests thrown out as they submitted to the Primarch's inspection. Doom had summoned the siege engineers of the 4th Legion, the defenders of the 7th, and the psychic warriors of the 15th to make sure nothing would go wrong. They lined the bridge in grim ranks beneath his gaze. A red-robed Mechanicus adept caught his eye. The man's cold, piercing stare made even the hardiest veteran uneasy. The adept dropped to his knees before Doom and intoned, 2 Titan legions await your command. At the same moment, a mortal officer in a tall velvet hat knelt and swore allegiance. 600,000 solar auxiliary troops stand ready to serve, he reported. Doom issued his orders with economy and authority. All Warhound warships, 1 Titan Legion, and the Mortal Auxiliary will follow me. The other legions will mass their warriors aboard the capital ships and fall in behind. Any vacated warships and support vessels will go to Russ. Russ, the Void Fleet is yours, he told the lord of that armada through his communicator. Then, turning to the Legion commanders arrayed on the bridge, he barked, "Move quickly. We leave ahead of schedule." "You just watch, brother." Russ's voice came rough and wild over the comms. He barked more orders, and the Space Wolves' fleet tightened itself around the Hrafnkel. Under Doom's swift direction, the warriors from the supporting legions sprang into action, falling back to the flagship, reorganizing, and handing the surplus warships over to Russ's command. "Where are the tongues?" the Primarch demanded. Locke met his stare and answered immediately, "Bringing them up now." Even before the Primarch's arrival, following astropathic guidance, the Warhounds had captured a number of psychic sand lizards alive on a frontier world to be questioned. Now Locke dropped to one knee with a handful of Warhounds at his back and spoke with a voice threaded through with apology and frustration. "My lord, I am truly sorry. The Legion's interrogators could not get anything from them." He swallowed. "They would sooner die than be taken. They endured our methods and chose death rather than surrender a single word." Russ's expression softened, and there was no blame in his reply. "That is not your fault. The galaxy is full of stubborn souls who would rather die than yield." Doom did not blame the Warhound's Legion master. It was a trivial matter. He had more than enough ways to make Xenos talk. Locke and Karn exhaled in relief. The Primarch's leniency far exceeded their expectations. The Warhounds had even braced themselves to receive punishment. "You weren't entirely without gain," Doom said. "At least you learned that the Xenos races have deep bonds and won't easily betray one another." He smiled benevolently, then spoke with a gravely serious tone. "We could make a great deal out of this, couldn't we?" The senior officers of the other legions on the bridge exchanged looks, struck by the Primarch's magnanimity. Even encased in their power armor, their frames stirred. The simple largesse of the great being moved them. Locke, overcome, started to kneel again, but Doom raised a hand to stop him. No need for that. Save your strength for the battlefield. We will never fail your expectations. The Warhound's warriors slammed their gauntleted fists against their breastplates in unison, a thunderous cadence of loyalty and resolve. Legion soldiers hauled a steel cage into the chamber, and inside it crouched a yellowish sand lizard. Its claws scraped against the metal with a sibilant hiss. Narrow vertical pupils swept the room, and it kept flicking its tongue to taste the air. Doom finally saw the creature in full, roughly 3 meters tall and bipedal, with short, powerful hind legs and long, muscular forelimbs ending in 4 dexterous fingers built for seizing weapons. Its body was heavily built and armored with thick, bony scales, and bright, conspicuous dorsal fins ran down its back. Human. It spoke in halting human speech, its cold features curled in contempt. A thin thread of drool hung from its sharp jaws. I will say nothing. Having enslaved humans for generations, the sand lizard knew enough of their language to make itself understood. Even confined in the cage, it radiated arrogance. Its eyes swept over the stern ranks assembled on the Gothic bridge, the solemn human faces, and the towering figure seated on the throne. The sand lizard's vertical pupils contracted so quickly it wouldn't even meet the giant's gaze. It hissed in halting syllables, voice trembling in the cage. Will not yield to you. Karn took a step forward, hand raised as if to punish the prisoner, but stopped when the Primarch lifted a single palm. Do not waste anger on a beast, the Primarch said, his voice calm and detached. Destroy their culture, eliminate their race, erase them from the memory of the universe. Doom pronounced the fate of a species as if discussing the weather. The sand lizard thrashed in its bonds. It had understood, in whatever small way it could, what the humans intended. Ahriman, read its memory. Find the coordinates of the Xenos homeworld. Yes, Lord. Ahriman of the 15th Legion answered and stepped forward. He closed his eyes. The superhuman warriors on the bridge felt an invisible thread snap taut between the sorcerer and the captive. The Xenos' body jerked as the psychic probe struck. Muscles quivered under the intrusion. It curled into itself, instinctively adopting a protective posture as the invader rifled through the images in its mind. Airman, clad in crimson armor, drew back his psychic presence and spoke to the Primarch in a hesitant voice. My lord, their species maintains a psychic barrier. If we force an incursion, it will kill them. The alien still mocked them, laughter dripping with contempt. Humans, powerless, it said. So all we need is for them to lower their mental defenses willingly? Doom inclined his head slightly and met Ahriman's eyes without reproach. Is that so? He asked calmly. Ahriman flushed, but answered with a heavy nod. Yes, my lord. Doom settled himself on the warship's throne and addressed the captive in the cage. Beast, he said, voice cold and flat. Raise your lowly head and look at me. The sand lizard felt the contempt in the command. It lifted its head with a snarl, fixing its gaze on the towering figure upon the dais. Doom snorted, a sound like a blade being drawn. His eyes locked onto the Xenos, and the suppressed killing intent coiled in his mind like a blade finding its edge. The force of it struck through his stare and into the creature. Every mortal on the bridge dropped to their knees, sweat ran down their faces. Even the Space Marines could not fault them. The Primarch's unleashed fury was a palpable thing, an icy, overwhelming presence, and it sent the sand lizard's 2 hearts racing. Rage flooded the alien, but the Primarch's psychic pressure had already found purchase. The killing intent pierced the creature's mental defenses like a spear. The creature suddenly reared up and then collapsed, spraying a yellow fluid in sheer terror. It curled into itself, clutching its tail, shrinking into a tight ball in the cage as its scales rasped together. The Primarch's presence swept across the bridge like a storm. Ahriman seized the moment and launched a psychic probe into the alien's mind, searching for everything he could about the Xeno species. Lord, I know everything, he said. After a few breaths, he bowed low to the Primarch. His power armor's servos whined from the overload. While dredging the sand lizard's memories, he had glimpsed something primeval and appalling, and the creature's fear-induced sweat had tripped the armor's air purification alarms. Ahriman moved to the command console, and after a few rapid inputs, pinpointed the Xenos homeworld among the stars. Notify the fleet to proceed to the Xenos homeworld. Doom gave the order at once. The fleet sprang into motion, a spearhead striking straight for the alien planet. Compile the rest of the intelligence into a written report. I want to be able to review it at any time. Understood, Lord. Russ, I'm taking the lead. Doom opened a holographic channel to bid his brother farewell. His accompanying fleet slipped into the warp. Be careful, Russ warned him, voice edged with a seriousness that left no room for argument. He knew his brother's plan, to descend straight on the Xenos' homeworld, was a reckless gambit. The Space Wolves' fleet will blockade the system. Doom only nodded and cut the link. The ships dove deeper into the warp for a short system jump. They dropped out into real space over the eastern end star territory, the Salt System, as the psychic sand lizards called it. Armin had already sorted the incoming intelligence and pushed it out to data slates across the fleet. When the Warhound's Legion's flagship, the Gloriana Queen, came out of the warp, the Salt's primary star blazed below them. The Vanguard had fanned through the system ahead of them, sweeping and scanning, collecting every scrap of information the Primarch would need. Below, the Xenos' homeworld rolled in an endless carpet of green, a temperate jungle world, thick with foliage. The fleet's augurs finished their sweeps, compile, ed the results, and streamed the picture up to the bridge. The entire system bloomed into life on the holographic command display. Warships, attack them. Drive the Xenos warships off and broadcast our arrival to their society. Seeing the images of the system, Doom made his decision without hesitation. He ordered the fleet to clear the Xenos vessels from the star system, but, to avoid telegraphing absolute dominance, sent only destroyers to engage the sand lizards, rock-like warships. Below, in the jungles of salts, the Xenos hive cities rose like islands of industry. Enormous reactor plumes billowed up and condensed into vapor that fed the surrounding canopy, an ecosystem woven around their technology. Unlike the Imperium's unrestrained sprawl, the Xenos had a sense of balance. Augur readings counted 6 hive cities in total, and they also revealed large numbers of human slaves living within them. Here, use plasma bombardment to clear the surrounding jungle, Doom ordered, selecting a target. The chosen city lay deep in the green, not far from the Xenos capital. Once the jungle was stripped away, the site would be an exposed plain, vulnerable and undefended. The Primarch's intent flashed through the command net. A destroyer swung into position, and its broadside macro cannons opened in a steady, thundering barrage. In response, the Xenos city hastily erected a psychic shield, a shimmering defense that rose to meet the fleet's strikes from orbit. Plasma clusters tore through the canopy, striking the green jungle city like a doomsday judgment from the sky. Macro cannons hammered at the shimmering purple psychic shield, pouring blistering plasma over the Xenos hive. Doom knew it was futile. The sand lizard's psychic ability was formidable. When they gathered, their powers resonated and amplified, and the city's purple curtain was the living expression of that convergence. When the destroyer fell silent, the jungle hive city still stood defiantly. The surrounding forest, however, had been vaporized, turned into a glassy, vitrified wasteland that glittered like crystal under the smeared light. "Are the Warhounds ready?" the Primarch asked over the comms. His voice was calm as still water, an ordinary question, yet carrying an undeniable authority. "We are always ready to fight for you," came the response, fierce and immediate. Locke's restrained roar threaded through the channel. He and his warriors had already left the bridge and sealed themselves into the drop pods, waiting only for their orders. 30,000 Warhounds, divided into 3 waves, will conduct precision orbital drops to seize the city's outer facilities, the Primarch ordered. The Titan Legion will drop at the positions I've assigned, acting as mobile fire platforms to cover the Space Marine's advance. Orbital drop initiated. At his command, the fleet rotated to present their ventral bays to the Xenos homeworld. Under the umbrella of the fleet's bombardment, the first wave, 2,500 drop pods, plunged through the atmosphere like a meteor shower, streaking toward the planet's surface. Author's note: 120, Legion, Legion. They screamed the cry into the void. Legion, Legion, and the void answered. 2,500 drop pods hurtled through Salt's sky like a second meteor shower, each one a screaming iron bell resisting the planet's atmosphere with nothing but inertia and the superhuman will of the warriors inside. Tail thrusters spat flame and smoke to control descent. Heat peeled at their hulls as they carved a white-hot path to the ground. 10,000 death angels were packed within them, a compact storm of polished ceramite and cold intent. Below, the hive city looked up and saw a rain of fire. Xenos scouts and sentries froze as the streaks of light seared across the heavens. Cold, bestial eyes narrowed, not in hunger this time, but in the raw, old fear of prey that has suddenly found a hunter. These creatures had watched the great humans fall generations before. They had learned to rule in the absence of their masters. Now something unexpectedly human blotted the sky. Who were these new humans? When, they wondered, would they stand again as lords of war? Among the slums and slave courts, the reaction was different. Chains rattled. Faces that had known only despair tilted upward and found a miraculous geometry against the smoke, metallic seeds of salvation. The pods were unmistakably human technology. Hope, brittle and astonishing, flared. On the ground, the Xenos warriors did not wait to see the pods touch dirt. Battle smoke and dust were already rising where the first bolters had opened fire. Hundreds surged toward the predictable descent zones, claws and rifles eager for action. Their weapons wanted only one thing: blood. They would meet the invaders in the sky if they could, and if not, they would be waiting when the iron bells finally slumped into the earth. The drop pods screamed on, unstoppable and indifferent. Above the hive city, the air trembled with the sound of falling war. Legion, legion. The cry hung between heaven and ground, a promise of a return no one had truly believed would come. When the drop pods slammed into the glassy sand, Space Marines in blue and white power armor poured out onto the crystalline surface, and the war between humanity and the sand lizards began in earnest. The reptiles exploded from the ruined city, slipping into the shimmering dunes like fish, sliding beneath incoming fire and erupting toward the Warhound's landing zone with terrifying speed. Their objective was clear: destroy the beachhead. Protect the landing zone. The cry went up. Legion Commander Locke was the first to step free of his pod. As the temporary ground commander, he was responsible for holding the LZ long enough for the rest of the force to arrive. He glanced at the dust plumes raised by the charging sand creatures and barked orders for his battle brothers to hold their positions and cover the incoming reinforcements. Those lowly Xenos dared to close with the Warhounds, a provocation that, in earlier battles, would have ended in wholesale slaughter. But today the Warhounds fought under the strictures of their Primarch. They had to temper their fury, to hold back in service of the campaign's larger strategy. For the Emperor! For the Primarch! Locke roared. He flicked the power switch on the axe in his right hand until the blade thrummed to life and revved the massive engine of the chainsword in his left until it screamed, and then he surged forward to meet the first wave. Karn led his brothers to the front, clearing the landing zone and holding the line while support was called up. Like fish springing from water, the sand lizards surged, roaring their battle cries in a harsh Xenos tongue as they fought to defend their homeland. There was no measured exchange of long-range fire. The first ground engagement erupted into pure, brutal melee. Across a 5-kilometer front, 10,000 Space Marines collided with the enemy in a slaughter. Berserkers met the sand lizard charges blade to blade at the front. Marksmen held the rear, laying down covering fire for their advancing brother. Abominations! Face the wrath of the Imperium! Karn howled as he charged. He wielded a chain axe in each hand. His roar was savage, and the monomolecular saw-toothed blades bit through armor and flesh without mercy. The sand lizard warriors shrieked back. Their vibrating weapons emitted high-frequency waves that grated on the teeth. Coupled with the natural vibration of their armored scales, it produced a torturous, cacophonous assault that assaulted an opponent's ears. The Legion warriors responded by activating their Lyman's ear implants, filtering out the sonic interference, and closed the distance to engage with cold, practiced efficiency. The Space Marines' power was undeniable. At close range, their weapons chewed through sand lizard scales and ripped their bodies apart. These warriors, remade in the Emperor's image, shed hot blood in a savage, efficient slaughter as the tide of Xenos surged and fell. Though the sand lizards could match neither the Marines' discipline nor their speed, they were vicious opponents. Agile movements and lightning reactions made the Astartes far deadlier overall. Karn dominated the field, His chain axes never stopped, the kill counter on his HUD ticking up with brutal speed. He stood amid heaps of alien bodies, blue and white power armor spattered red, an immovable engine of slaughter extracting humanity's vengeance. The sand lizards' psychic tricks were neutralized. Their illusions had no purchase on Astartes' minds, so the fight collapsed into raw, physical combat. Even so, the enemy still had teeth. High-frequency blades could bite through power armor, claws and savage strikes were lethal, and a single ferocious throw could send a Marine stumbling. At the landing zone's front, the first 10,000 Space Marines bled and fought as never-ending waves of sand lizards kept coming. Blood from both sides steamed on the still scorching sand, a hatred that would not end until one side was dead. Metal rang against metal. Clang, clang, clang. Karn felt impacts across his power armor and immediately pulled back from the knives and fists range. He wasn't the only one. The Legion's warriors reacted with the same swift discipline, most of them breaking off the close-quarters fight at once. The Sand Lizard's auxiliary troops were arriving. Smaller than the warriors, they advanced in loose ranks, moving slowly while carrying automatic weapons. Through the blur of heat and smoke, the Space Marines made out human shapes among them, skin stretched over bone, faces hollow and unreadable, firing with mechanical steadiness. Above, the orbital fleet did not pause. New airborne units were dropping in faster than the Marines could count. A roar filled the sky again, not the violent thump of drop pods this time, but the deeper, more deliberate thunder of landing craft bringing down the mortal auxiliaries. "Brothers, hold on! The Primarch's reinforcements are here!" Legion Commander Locke cried, raising his weapon in a triumphant salute. He had not expected the mortal forces to touch down less than 2 minutes after the fighting had become close and chaotic. Even as he shouted, he could not help but marvel at the Primarch's timing and coordination. So swift, so exact, it bordered on uncanny. The mortal legion poured out of the landing craft, already in fighting formation, drilled aboard ship so they could deploy and engage at once. They locked into the battle line, using the Space Marines as an anchor while the Legion's long-range teams laid down cover fire for the towering demigod warriors pushing forward. Tech priests of the Adeptus Mechanicus hastily deployed shield generators to keep the landing site safe from heavy enemy fire. In the second-largest city on the Sand Lizard homeworld, inside the Imperium's established landing zone, the foothold was hard-won but held. The Xenos cried out in panic and fury. Every city gate banged open, and under the protection of psychic barriers, Sand Lizard warriors and their vast auxiliary army poured into the streets. The auxiliary forces were enormous, and many of them burrowed underground to avoid the artillery and neutralize the advantage of human long-range weapons. From beneath the soil, Sand Lizard fighters slipped outside the main battle line and erupted into the human ranks, striking at weak points and flanking columns. For a time, the fearless lizards wreaked considerable havoc within the Imperium's lines. "Retreat inside the shield!" The Adeptus Mechanicus voices crackled over the comms, cold, mechanical, but urgent and oddly elated. "Titan thrones will touch down in 20 seconds. That announcement snapped the Warhound's advance to a halt. No one could ignore what was coming from above. True to the Mechanicus timing, an oppressive weight dropped out of the sky as 3 Titan thrones slammed down around the landing zone. The ground shuddered with the impact. Rumble, and the mortal troops went to their knees, eyes shut against the shock and dust as they braced to keep their footing. Even the Space Marines crouched, using the moment to steady themselves amid the aftershocks. Only the Adeptus Mechanicus stood apart, watching shield readouts and murmuring praise to the Omnissiah for the machine's power. Beyond the protection of that shimmering barrier, the Sand Lizard host and the stealthy burrowers caught in the open were crushed by the sheer force of the landings. When the dust finally settled, 3 towering thrones loomed outside the shield like metal mountains. The hatches groaned open, and one by one, 3 Warhound Titans rose from their cradles. "The Titan war machines have arrived," the comms declared, the words crackling with a mixture of triumph and dread. "Destroy the enemies of the Omnissiah." The 30-meter-tall Warhound Titans, deployed under the Primarch's direction, fell back to the flanks of the battle line and took up a steady, suppressing fire on the Xenos Hive city. Their weapons hammered the outer defenses, keeping the sand lizard's psychic barrier pressured and fractured wherever it tried to heal. The Primarch's voice came over the comms, calm, steady, and strangely comforting amid the din of war. Hold your ground. You can rest a while. The Xenos won't dare come out while we keep up the pressure. As his words faded, 5 Stormhawk gunships screamed down from the sky and touched down. Their ramps dropped and 10 towering figures poured out, destroyer warriors, their heavy servos whining, escorted by 10 robed members of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Under Doom's orders, they had been sent to the ground for a single vital task. What made the sand lizards so dangerous wasn't merely their bulk or ferocity. When they massed, their individual minds linked into a unified psychic field. Standing together, they generated a convergent psionic shield that acted like an endless well of energy, a moving, self-repairing fortress. Macro-cannon barrages and massive ground strikes blew chunks out of the city and bruised the Xenos, but those attacks could not break a sustained psychic convergence quickly enough. Each bombardment cost time, and time was Doom's most precious commodity. The destroyer warriors and their Mechanicus attendants stepped into the breach with that in mind. Their mission was surgical: penetrate the psychic lattice, sever the link between the sand lizards, and collapse the shield from within. Everything else, the Titan's thunder, the Primarch's watchful voice, the storm of ordnance, was meant to buy them those dwindling moments. The city had to be taken quickly and a secure foothold established. If they hesitated, reinforcements from the enemy's homeworld would arrive and encircle them, turning the campaign into a grinding war of attrition they could not win. After a terse briefing, the destroyer warriors reboarded their Stormhawks and headed for the objective. Above the hive city, lances of light stabbed down from the sky. The enemy's psychic shield shimmered and spat like bad glass. "This is it," someone muttered as the transports roared on. A 5-man squad detached from the main fighting force and touched down at the edge of an open jungle a few clicks from the city. The hive city itself rose like a black mountain, home to a teeming, hungry population. Their water source lay 100 kilometers away, fed by buried aqueducts and pumps that ran directly into the hive. Standing where they did, even through the soil, the faint thrum of those conduits could be felt. "They're drawing water now," the squad's tech observer said. "They're siphoning it to keep the city supplied." "We need to move fast," Onesimus snapped, already handing orders to the Adeptus Mechanicus servitors. "If the Xenos catch wind of this, they'll shut the pipes. The last thing we need is for them to cut the supply before we have a foothold." The Mechanicus men set to work at once, digging through the loam to expose the buried conduits. Time, and the fragile advantage it bought them, was everything. 10 of them slipped into the city via the waterway, letting the current carry them close enough to the entrenched Xenos to strike without warning. It was the Genefather's first major battle, and even the cold, hard hearts of the Sons of Destruction felt a new urgency. None of them dared relax for a single breath.